Welcome to Mr. Nightbleed. Tonight, in 7 terrifying true cemetery horror stories, we cross the rusted gates of cemeteries where names are carved in stone, flowers wilt overnight, and the earth itself remembers what we try to forget. These are chilling tales of bells that ring when no wind blows, voices that whisper from cracked mausoleums, and footsteps crunching over gravel when you know you're completely alone. This is a brand new channel, and my goal this month is to gather 3,000 brave souls who dare to step into the darkness. Almost 90% of people who watch never subscribe. They vanish back into the shadows. Don't be one of them. Before we begin, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from and what time is it for you right now? And if there's a cemetery in your town that makes your skin crawl, type its name, because once you step past the gates of these haunted cemeteries, some things don't let you leave. Kill the lights, silence the world, take a deep breath, and let's begin. I went to New Orleans because my cousin Lila was getting married and she wanted a second-line parade instead of a limo. It was one of those decisions that fit her perfectly. Brass band, white parasols, everybody dancing down Decatur Street, while strangers joined in like we all belonged to the same family. I hadn't been on a plane in a couple years. I figured I'd celebrate, eat too much, maybe pretend I knew how to two-step. I didn't plan on going to a cemetery. I especially didn't plan on what happened after. On our first full day, we had time to kill before the rehearsal dinner. Lila, her fiancé Marcus, and I took the streetcar, then walked the last few blocks in that heavy, wet heat you only understand when you're there. The city smelled like beignets and beer and rain that hadn't fallen yet. Marcus had read about St. Louis Cemetery No. 1 in a travel article, and said the tours were the only way you could get inside. It's the oldest one, he told me, in that confident tone he uses when he's done a quick Google and wants credit. Above-ground tombs. Marie Laveau's supposed to be there. Lila gave me a look. You okay with that? You hate spooky stuff. I hate cheap haunted houses, I said. Tourist cemeteries are different. I don't know why I said that. I didn't believe it as the words left my mouth. Maybe I didn't want to be the one who said no. Maybe I wanted to see what the city did with its dead. In New Orleans, the dead don't hide. They have addresses. We met the guide at the gate. He was a thin man with a straw hat, a laminated badge, and a voice like a late-night radio host. Name's Andre, he said, and when he smiled, I noticed his front tooth was chipped. This place is a city inside the city. Streets, corners, family homes. Respect is the rent we pay to walk here. He unlocked the padlock and pushed the gate open. The air inside felt different. It wasn't cooler, not really, but the heat pressed down in a heavier way. The tombs rose like white ovens. Their plaster cracked and their little iron gates rusted in pretty patterns. Some names were dates and nothing else. Some had whole paragraphs etched into the stone, the handwriting of loss forced through a chisel. I lifted my phone for a picture and saw my own dark shape spill across a vault door. That's normal in bright light, I told myself, but something made me look up for the sun. It was straight overhead. My shadow lay at an angle that didn't make sense. I adjusted my feet until it lined up. It didn't. I told myself the walls were reflective and moved on. Andre talked as we walked. He told us about the floods, about the water table, about why the dead had to be lifted into air that baked. He made jokes that landed easy with the crowd. He warned us not to touch any offerings. He pointed out the way the paths made a grid. If you get turned around, he said, always look for the bell tower beyond the fence. I looked and couldn't see it for the tombs. We stopped at a wall stacked with vaults like bread ovens. Names I didn't know stared back. Babineau, Rizzo, Nguyen, Perez. People left coins wedged into the cracks, sometimes little notes. A small blue rosary lay coiled like a sleeping snake on the ledge. As Andre lifted his hand to gesture, something dark slid along the plaster behind him. I took a quick breath. My eyes watered. It was only a shadow, I told myself, a cloud moving. But the sky was a white lid without a mark in it. I didn't say anything. Lila would laugh and nudge me and tell me I was doing that thing again where I make normal stuff into a thing. So I blinked and stared at the letters until they blurred. When I refocused, the shadow was gone. We moved on to the famous part. The place everyone had told us to see was the tomb of Marie Laveau, the so-called voodoo queen. It was painted white and covered in red X's where people had marked it, even though the guide said that's not allowed anymore. Offerings crowded the base, beads, little plastic dolls, a half-burned candle in a glass that still smelled like church. Someone had left a note folded into a triangle, wedged between two bricks. I could make out the beginning in a cramped hand, please. Nothing more. Andre stayed polite when people asked the same questions. He kept the group moving. I drifted subtly to the back because the press of bodies bothered me, and because I wanted a picture without tourists in it. My shadow fell across a corner of wall and then, this is the part that doesn't fit cleanly into ordinary explanation, it pulled away. Not fast. Not dramatic. There was no jump scare. My shadow just loosened. It stretched along the corner and curled out of sight like a ribbon being pulled by a hand around the bend. I took a step back and it snapped into place again, like when a kite lets go of wind. The hair on my arms lifted. My mouth tasted like a penny. I told myself I was dehydrated. I took a swig of warm water and didn't say a word. We walked past a tomb with a little iron fence where a black cat lay in the shade. Lila tried to coax it over. It flicked an ear and stared into the narrow alley between vaults as if there were birds there, or mice. There wasn't anything there. The cat's gaze tracked something moving low and slow. My own eyes couldn't find it. When I bent a little to see if I could match its angle, the cat hissed, a quick automatic sound, and its fur puffed. Then it relaxed again, focused still, as if it remembered anger wasn't worth the heat. "See that?" I whispered to Marcus. He glanced at the cat, shrugged, and wandered back to the center of the group. "City cats," he said. "I don't want to make this part sound bigger than it was." There were tourists laughing. A kid asked where the zombies were and his mother shushed him. Somewhere outside the wall a horn honked twice. I was not in a movie. I was in a place full of sun and stone and people. The sense that something was wrong had to fight through all that to reach me, but it did. It came like a pressure change, like when a storm is far off and you can't see it yet, only feel the world brace for it. Andre finished near the back wall with a story about a caretaker who slept here during a hurricane and swore he heard singing in a language he didn't know. "You'll hear many things in this city," he said. "Most of them are music. Some are warnings." He smiled when he said it, and the group smiled back, and some of them tipped him, and we filed out behind him into the ordinary street. Lila wanted iced coffee, so we walked to a place on the corner with ceiling fans that clicked as they turned. My shirt stuck to my back. Marcus kept looking up restaurants, planning out the next day like you could order the city like a menu. I tried to join in. I said yes to a shrimp po' boy and no to an afternoon swamp tour. I laughed when Lila laughed. I didn't tell them I kept checking the floor to make sure my shadow stayed attached to my feet. I didn't say that sometimes. For a blink it didn't. We went back to our rental, napped under the too cold air from a window unit, showered, and got ready for the dinner. I put on a clean shirt and caught myself in the mirror and flinched before I knew why. It took me a few seconds to process it. My reflection blinked about a beat after I did. That's the kind of thing your brain hates. It wants timing to be perfect. I told myself it was the light, the fan, the cheap mirror warping. I waved a hand. The reflection waved a hand half a breath late. I smoothed my face and smiled wide, and there at least it was normal again. I didn't sleep great that night. I dreamed of doorways too narrow for any living person to walk through. When I woke, the room was gray and the window unit coughed a little white frost and the digital clock read 6:06. The colon between the sixes blinked. My shadow lay across the floor in a soft trapezoid. It looked right. That helped. The wedding went like a movie. The band played. Strangers danced. Lila cried in a happy way I'd never seen from her, and Marcus looked like he believed in luck. If the story ended there, I'd have a good memory and nothing else. But you don't stop reading in the middle because the sentences feel nice. You keep going because you want to find out what the thing is having to show you. 2 days later, before we flew home, we tried to squeeze in the last bits of New Orleans. Baignets, the river. Those little antique shops with velvet chairs and too many mirrors. In late afternoon, Lila said she wanted to go back to the cemetery for one more quick walkthrough. Her hair was pinned up, her shoulders pink from sun, and she had that look like the city had charmed her and she wasn't ready to say goodbye. Marcus said he'd rather stay by the air conditioning with a beer and a plate of fries. We made a deal. Lila and I would go on the late tour, take our pictures, be back by dinner. At the gate, the same guide was there. Andre recognized us and tipped his hat. "Back so soon?" "It's her fault," I said, and Lila bumped my shoulder. We paid. We stepped inside. The light at that hour did something strange. It picked out every flaw in the plaster and turned it into a story. It made the shadows long and thin, like the writing of a child learning cursive. The group was smaller this time. A young couple holding hands, an older man in a short-sleeve button-down and a camera strap across his chest, a woman in a Sazerac shirt unsmiling. The guide gave the shorter version and kept us moving. From the first turn, I felt like the place had shifted a half-inch between yesterday and today. Not a big move. Just enough that the paths were less straight, the corners a little blind. Lila slid her arm through mine and whispered that it would make a great photo to frame for her hallway. A little slice of, "We were here." I said sure, and lifted my phone. The screen pulsed once, then twice, and refused to focus. It made everything look like a smudged painting. I wiped the lens on my shirt. Same result. When I pointed it toward the ground and then up, it sharpened for a beat and then clouded again whenever the walls filled the frame. I decided not to take pictures. At Marie Laveau's tomb, a new note had appeared since the first visit. It was folded into a careful square and tucked under the edge of a brick. The corner stuck out like a white tongue. I don't know why I noticed it. I don't know why my fingers moved before my brain could remind me about respect and rules. I never opened it. I just touched it. The paper was cool. A sensation I can only describe as the feeling you get when a car passes too close on a highway, moved over my skin. I stepped back and rubbed my hand on my shorts because it suddenly felt damp. My fingertips came away clean and dry. "Don't be weird," Lila murmured with a smile, but her smile looked too tight. We fell behind for a second there and I hustled us forward. That was when the shadow came. It slid along the right wall, slow as a drop of oil. It pooled at a corner and then lifted its upper edge like it had a head, and was peeking around to see if we were watching. It didn't belong to any of us. The sun was to our left. The shadows for all of us ran left, crisp and predictable. This thing ran right. It was attached to the wall, not the ground. It had no owner. I stopped like someone had grabbed my ankle. Lila said my name in a voice that had too much air in it. The shadow eased around the corner and withdrew like a hand, choosing not to touch a hot stove after all. I don't think anyone else saw it. The young couple was taking a selfie. The older man was fiddling with a battery. The unsmiling woman stared ahead like she already knew the ending. "Let's go," Lila whispered. "I don't want to be here." I wanted to agree. Instead, my body did what bodies do sometimes when the mind is trying to be wise. It moved toward the thing it should avoid. I walked those few steps to the corner and peered into the narrow run between tombs. Nothing. Only crumbly white and a little shelf with a chipped angel missing an arm. But then the angel's shadow detached and slid along the far wall in the opposite direction of the light, and I knew the angel had nothing to do with it. The shadow paused, if a void can pause, and then continued, coaxing us deeper. "Please," Lila said again, and now the word cracked. "Let's go back to the group." I should have listened. I didn't. I told myself it would only be a few steps, that I'd take a look and then turn around. I told myself I was in a place with other people a shout away. I told myself I was the same person who came in. If you want to know how much your own words weigh, watch what happens when you stack them against whatever lives in edges. We went maybe 4 turns in, always keeping left, always following the thin run of shade that held its own shape like a ribbon laid out on a kitchen floor. The sounds of the group softened. The guide's voice blurred into the background like a radio in another room. The air thickened. I kept waiting for Lila to plant her feet and make me stop. She didn't. She clung to my arm and walked with me like she thought speed would get us through a long hallway faster. At the 5th corner, I realized we had lost the grid. We weren't moving in clean lines anymore. The path took a little dip where the ground had subsided, then rose sharply so we had to step up like we were climbing into a bus. My breath sounded loud. Sweat ran down my sides and soaked the waistband of my shorts. The ribbon of shadow smoothed itself against the next wall and slid around another bend. My phone buzzed. I looked down and saw Marcus's name. I swiped and tried to answer. The screen locked and flashed the Apple logo as if it had rebooted itself. I looked up and the world went a fraction darker. It was a trick of my eyes adjusting, I told myself. I told myself many things. I decided to stop and turn around. When we turned, the way back had grown an extra curve. It shouldn't have been possible. There are only so many ways to arrange rectangles. Yet the little street of white boxes behind us ran off at an angle I didn't remember. A lid of sky peered down, pale and cloudless. For a second I saw rich blue. A good blue that made me think of pools and clean sheets. Then a thin film slid over it like the top of milk cooling. "Hey," I called, not panicked, not yet. "Andre?" The name sounded wrong here. It came back to me in a strange low echo I felt more in my ribs than in my ears. Lila squeezed my arm until her fingers hurt. "It's fine," I said. "It's..." The shadow we had been following lifted itself just enough that I could see it did not come from a person. It was the shape shadows take when your mind insists on a shape for something that won't give you one. Tall, but taller than any person you'd feel comfortable standing near. Narrow in a way that suggested it could slip through places your body could not. It pressed itself close to a door that had no handle, and seeped along the crack until a line of darkness shot across the threshold like ink pulled by a magnet. The door was shut. The line crawled under it anyway. We should have run at that moment. I know that because of how hard it is now to understand why we didn't. Lila's nails were in my skin. "I can't breathe," she said in a low voice. I thought she meant it metaphorically, and then I realized no. Her breaths were short and shallow, like someone winding down. "Out," I said. "We're going out." We took 3 steps back the way we came, then 5, then 10. The path narrowed and made us turn our shoulders. The corners were wrong again. I didn't know whether to keep left or keep right. My head throbbed in a small mean way. I kept seeing angles that didn't add up. A figure crossed an opening a dozen feet ahead. A man in a light shirt, tallish, phone in his hand. I felt relief hit me almost nauseatingly. "Sir!" I shouted. He turned and his face was nothing was wrong with it. That's important. If I tell you his face was stretched or melting, you'll think I'm dressing the story for effect. No. His face was fine. He was a person with a person's face. He lifted his hand like he was glad to see us, and then his shadow fell the wrong way off him and wrapped around the base of a tomb, and then slipped into the crack between bricks like a black eel going home. The man unfroze, blinked around like he'd lost his thought, and walked away the other direction, still checking his phone. I swallowed too hard and spit the sourness in my mouth on the ground. Lila said my name in the tiny voice she hadn't used since we were kids, and we broke a window and lied about it for 2 days. That did it. I took her hand. "We're leaving," I said, and I didn't make it a question. When we turned again, the shadow we'd first followed lay across the ground like a stitch. It crossed between our feet and retreated into the small triangle of space behind a raised tomb. The triangle didn't look big enough for anything larger than a cat, and even a cat would have had to flatten itself. My shadow overlapped the triangle and held for a second like a sticker refusing to peel off a backing. Then I felt something tug at my ankle. It wasn't contact the way you feel a hand. It was that feeling you get when you think you've stepped on the edge of your pant leg, and it's going to trip you, except I wore shorts. My heel stuck to the ground for a second against a weight that wasn't weight. I pulled free. It felt like freeing a sleeve from old paint. We took a longer way, choosing any path that ran toward what I guessed was the gate. The sun was lowering. The edges of the tombs glowed and made the spaces between them darker. There were smells: chalk, rust, the sweet bite of a candle that had been snuffed. A mosquito whined and found my neck, and I slapped it too hard. Blood, maybe mine, streaked my fingers. I wiped them on stone. The streak stayed. It would be the only physical mark I took from that place that I could see with someone else's eyes. The path forked at a little triangular plaza with a broken bench. The bench had a shadow like a boat hull. In it, for a second, I saw the shape of a person sitting. Relief again. I started to speak. The sitting shape shifted like it was laughing at me, then pulled itself thin and streaked toward the base of a vault where it vanished. The itch between my shoulder blades got teeth. "Left," I said. "No, right. Just pick," Lila said. She wasn't crying yet, but her voice had that glassy sound. We went right. 10 steps later, a gate appeared. Not the front gate, but a side gate chained from the outside. Through its mesh, I could see the street. People walked past with grocery bags. A girl in headphones hopped sideways to avoid a puddle. A man pushed a cooler on wheels. When I called, none of them heard. The sound died at the fence and fell into the ground like it was heavy. I shook the gate. It rattled good and loud to my hands and quiet to my ears. No one looked over. There was a moment there I won't be able to make you feel. Words don't carry that weight well. It was the moment when I felt certain we were still within the distance of ordinary rescue, and also certain that rescue wouldn't cross whatever line we had crossed. I thought of Andre. I thought of the kid with the zombie joke. I thought of Marcus, probably on the couch with his plate of fries, and the way he'd roll his eyes and say we were dramatic. I thought of the cat and the way it hissed like a reflex and then settled again because anger wasn't going to change anything. I let go of the gate and it stopped rattling and the silence rushed back. We didn't have the luxury of panic. We chose paths. We backed out of dead ends. The sun fell lower. I started keeping my left hand on the walls the way you do in a corn maze. When the walls warmed my palm, it helped. When they went cool and damp, it didn't. Twice I stopped because I heard footsteps we didn't make. Once I heard a sigh that might have been wind passing the mouth of a small niche, except there was no wind. At a corner I recognized by a small, rusted hook someone had hammered into plaster 40 years ago and never used. I said we only had 2 turns left. I said it with conviction. I needed a voice that sounded like it believed me. Lila nodded and copied my breathing. We rounded the penultimate turn and walked straight into shadow. This time there was nothing thin or ribbon-like about it. It wasn't dramatic with arms and head and cape. It was just a clean, flat swath that belonged to no object in the world. It lay across the path from one wall to the other. It looked like a strip of night someone had installed like tile. I stopped because my body stopped. Lila took a half step more and the dark lapped the toe of her sandal and took it in the way a puddle takes the toe of a shoe after rain. She yanked back, breath snagging, heel scraping. The shadow held the shape of her toe for a second and then relaxed into perfect straightness again. "No," she said. No. I don't know why I did what I did next. I wish the story had a brave part. It doesn't. I bent and picked up a pebble and tossed it. When it crossed into the dark strip, it vanished. No splash, no bounce, no clink against stone. I stared down hard and saw nothing. Not depth, not tricks. Just a seam where our world met the edge of another kind of wrong. In the end, there was no strategy. The shadow bowed a little in its middle like fabric in a breeze even though the air was still. It thinned by a fraction and I moved when it did and dragged Lila with me. The dark touched the skin over my ankle bone and for an instant I felt cold as if the rest of me had been left in a fridge and my foot had been taken outside into winter air. I stumbled and kept going and then we were across and my ankle burned in a clean line that would leave no mark. After that, the last turn opened and the main path was there and the guide's voice was there and the ordinary complaining of a couple who thought the tour was boring was there. We stepped into it. Into the same air we had been breathing the whole time, except now it felt like air again and not something flavored like old stone. Andre saw us and lifted his chin in a small greeting and then looked away because we were just 2 more tourists he had to deliver to the exit. We didn't say anything. We walked out behind the group and the gate shut and the padlock clicked and the street held us up. Lila's knees shook. We bought water from a guy with a cooler and drank it sitting on the curb. It tasted like the best thing I had ever put in my mouth. The ankle that had touched the shadow felt like a coin left on a windowsill. Back at the rental, I stood in the bathroom with the light on and looked at my reflection. I had dirt on my shoulder and a chalk smear on my forearm. My ankle looked ordinary. I turned my foot different ways. It stayed a foot. When I lifted my head, I caught the mirror delay again. It was half a second now. Not every time. Not enough to be proof that wouldn't get dismissed if I told someone. Enough to make me feel like I'd been dubbed badly into my own face. We flew home the next day. The plane made me feel safe for 6 hours because there was nothing for shadows to cling to but our bodies. And our bodies threw predictable shapes on blue carpet and seatbacks. When the flight attendant came by with ginger ale, I asked for 2 and drank them both, and slept with my mouth open because I needed to know I could fall all the way into ordinary sleep and come back. If the story ended there, I'd feel embarrassed telling it. It doesn't end there. This is the part I don't try to make anyone believe. This is the part I say out loud to you because if I keep it only in my head, it grows. A week later, I stood in my kitchen and dropped a fork and bent to pick it up. My shadow against the cabinet delayed half a breath before bending too. Not much, not showy. Enough that my heart tripped. 2 nights later, I was brushing my teeth and my shadow on the shower curtain lifted its hand before I did. It lifted it like it was testing the range. When I froze, it froze. I finished brushing while staring at the curtain and the shadow finished brushing and then, just barely, turned its head toward me a fraction fast, like a friend trying to start a joke and losing its nerve. I started leaving lights on because light made me feel in control. Then I started turning them off because the shadows in lamplight are softer and easier to pretend about, while the ones in bright white can show seams. I kept my ankle covered for a while, like the line would show if I looked too long. It never did. I called Lila twice a day at first. She said she was okay. She said she had nightmares, but they were the kind you tell yourself will fade. She said sometimes her shadow looked thinner than it should. She laughed when she said it because she wanted it to be the kind of thing you could laugh about. The other day I stood on a sidewalk downtown around noon. The shadows were short. Mine was short. I stared at it and told it to move. Not out loud. In my head, like a dare you give yourself while your brain is still soft from bad sleep. My shadow didn't move. A bus passed and threw a long shape across my legs, and in that instant, in that flood of borrowed dark, I had a sensation like a fish nudging my calf in a lake. Not a bite. Not pain. Recognition. I'm not saying something came home with me. I don't have the right words to say it clean. I think we left something there and brought something else back, like a trade you don't know you're making. I think sometimes about the caretaker who heard singing in a language he couldn't name, and I wonder if I could learn it if I stood in the right alley long enough. I think about going back with a better plan, and then I feel the cold across my ankle bone and my plan gets very small. 2 nights ago, I woke at 3:12 and lay quiet because the house had that held breath it gets before a storm. A car passed outside and turned the slats of the blinds into a zebra of light across my wall. My shadow on the wall didn't move. I lay there and waited for the next car to paint me stripes, and when it did, my shadow was facing me. It leaned just a fraction, like it was peeking around a tomb door to see if I was watching. I closed my eyes, and I don't think I slept, but the next thing I remember is the room gray with morning and my eyes hot and my mouth dry. When I stood and stretched, my shadow did it with me, perfectly on time, obedient, ordinary. I made coffee. I drank it standing up. Some days I'm fine. Some days I'm so fine that I decide I imagined everything. I look at my ankle and its skin and the shape of my foot makes sense, and I can't remember the feeling of something tugging me where I didn't want to go. Then I pass a bright white wall and my shadow slides half a beat into place like a late dancer, and the fine cracks again. If you go to St. Louis Cemetery No. 1, go with a group. Listen to the guide. Leave the notes where they lie. Don't follow anything that moves the wrong way. Keep your eyes on the bell tower beyond the fence and keep count of your turns, even if you're not the kind of person who counts things. If a shadow invites you deeper with patience instead of fear, understand that patience is worse. Fear shouts. Patience waits until you think it was your idea. We left the city with music in our ears and sweat on our backs and pictures of white stone that look like any other pictures of white stone. The camera never shows the part of the story you need it to show. The part that matters is the half-beat you can't photograph. The half-beat between you and the thing that knows how to make your shape move after you do. If you follow a shadow too far and you come back, you won't come back alone. And if you don't follow, that's good. That's smart. There are other streets in that city where the light falls the right way and people dance and you can be just a person, sipping something cold on a porch. I hope that's what you are. I hope you stay that. Me. I stand in doorways now before I walk through them and watch the line of dark at my feet to make sure it's mine. Sometimes when I'm brave enough to say it in words, I tell myself I'll be fine. The words feel light. The line at my feet looks obedient. Then somewhere on the wall, something thin lifts its edge like it's checking whether I'm paying attention. And I look away first because I don't want to find out what happens if I keep watching. I'm not the kind of person who goes looking for haunted places. I work nights at a coffee shop on 7th Avenue. I split the rent on a dim little apartment with my younger sister, and most of my big plans involve making sure the Con Ed bill gets paid on time. Greenwood is part of my life because it's on my walk home. I cut down 23rd Street, past the iron fence, and if I'm late enough, I'm alone with the wind and the traffic hum and the smell of damp earth. That's it. I don't climb fences, I don't bring candles, and I don't film things for TikTok. I just walk. This started last October. The air had that bite you get in New York when it decides summer's finally over. My sister Lena called me while I was wiping down the espresso machine. She didn't say hi. She said, I need to go back to Greenwood. We'd buried our mom's ashes there the year before in a family plot we share with a grandmother I barely remember and a great uncle I never met. Lena had written a letter she hadn't had the nerve to read at the memorial. It sat in our kitchen drawer under the scissors and rubber bands for 11 months, getting soft around the edges. I can't stop thinking about it, she said. I have to actually leave it there, you know? Not just keep it in the drawer being weird. Okay, I said. When? Tonight. Before I chicken out again. I told my manager I had a stomach thing, cashed out early, and met her at the main gate on 5th Avenue at dusk. The sky looked rubbed out with a thumb, gray and streaky. The chapel lights were warm and square, and there were a few people still wandering the paths. Dog walkers, a couple in matching beanies. The guard at the gate, a heavy-set guy in a faded uniform with a Yankees cap, called, "We're closing in 20. Don't get stuck?" "We'll be quick," I said. We walked the paved loop toward Sylvan Water, where the pines crowd in and the ground goes soft. I don't know all the tree names, but you don't need to. These ones are old. They reach up like they're measuring the sky, and the needles make a sound when the wind runs through them that you feel in your stomach, like standing too close to a speaker at a show. We were quiet for a while. You learn to be there. The plot is on a slope with a view of the pond. My grandmother's stone is low and square and simple. My mother's name is on a smaller marker, the kind you notice because you're looking for it. Lena stood over the grass and swallowed a few times like she was about to speak, then folded her letter and tucked it upright between two flat stones at the back of the plot. When she stepped away, wind came off the pond and rattled the needles overhead. It wasn't hard. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't anything except a small real thing, and I felt weirdly proud of her. "Want a minute?" I said. "I think that was the minute," she said. "Let's go." We were almost back to the chapel when it happened. The path cuts under a cluster of pines that lean over it like a tunnel. A gust came through. I don't know how else to say this. It said my name. Not shouted. Not spooky. Not a horror movie whisper. The wind moved through the needles and made a shape that sounded like Eli. I stopped because I thought someone had walked up behind me and said it. There was no one. Lena took 2 more steps before she noticed I wasn't next to her. "You okay?" she said. "Did you hear that?" "Hear what?" "They're closing." Come on, I told myself I was being dramatic. We got ushered out by the guard with the Yankees hat, who locked the gate behind us with a chain that clacked like teeth. We walked down the hill toward the subway, and I told myself out loud, "Coincidence." Lena squeezed my arm and said nothing. That night I woke up at 3:11 a.m. to my phone buzzing. It was a voicemail with no missed call. I listened. The first 5 seconds were the low static you get when a caller keeps the phone in a pocket. Then a sound like the ocean in the distance, then the same hiss pattern, and, on the edge of it, my name. Not as clear as before. Just enough to make my hand go numb where I held the phone. I didn't wake Lena. I lay there and made little bargains in my head the way you do. If it happens again, I'll save it. If it happens twice, I'll call someone. If it happens 3 times, I'll go back in daylight. If it was a glitch, if it was wind, if it was anything reasonable, I'd accept it and move on. The next day at the coffee shop, I told my friend Dev, who works Sundays and covers night shifts whenever I beg. He's the kind of guy who'd climb a fence just to say he did, but he's not a jerk about it. He listened while he restocked the pastry case. "There's a shape to the wind in there," he said. "You're not crazy." I used to cut through on my bike, and it always felt like the pines were, I don't know, talking. Not English, just talking. "Don't say talking," I said. "Okay, not Englishing," he said. "Did you save the voicemail?" "No," I panicked. "I deleted it." Classic. You were probably half asleep. You know your own name better than anything. Brains fill in blanks. "Thanks, doctor," I said. That night I walked past the fence and made myself look in between the bars at the darkness under the trees. I didn't hear anything. The traffic on the Gowanus muttered. Somewhere a siren wound down. I told myself I'd made it big in my head and let it shrink again. A week went by. Lena got a sinus infection and slept 12 hours a day. I counted money and burned my fingers and fell back into the routine. Then a kid came into the shop in a ghost hunting t-shirt with a microphone clipped to his hoodie, and Dev said, "You're the guy with the cemetery wind." I glared at him until the kid left. He rolled his eyes. "What? He's harmless." He asked if we'd ever seen anything weird, and you have. Also, you're being super weird. I don't want views. I want it to not be a thing. Then go back and make it not a thing, he said, in daylight. With a person, with me. We'll walk past your plot and stand under the whisper trees, and if nothing happens, you can go back to being boring. I told him he was insufferable, but I said yes. We met at noon on a Wednesday. The sky was bright and flat and November cold. The guard at the gate wasn't the Yankees guy. It was an older woman with a badge that said Walsh. I liked her face. She had one of those kind, tired faces you trust. "Which way to Sylvan Water?" Dev asked, cheerful and loud the way he gets when he's performing not caring. "Stay to the right at the fork," she said, and then she looked at me like she knew me. You two be mindful of the wind down there today. It's gusty. The pines get chatty. I laughed because I thought she was making a joke, then stopped because she didn't smile. Chatty how? I said. Like they're telling you something you already know, she said. Like they took your voice and spit some of it back. Don't linger if it bothers you. We've had fainting. We walked. I don't know if that conversation made me hear more or if there was more. But the needles hissed and the hiss seemed to shape itself into syllables, rough and almost words. When we got to the pond, the sound dropped to a thick underwater silence that made me swallow. Dev pointed out a turtle by the bank and a plastic bag caught high in branches like a pale flag. Everything ordinary. Everything fine. At the plot, the letter was gone from where we'd tucked it. I felt that in my stomach. I didn't say anything to Dev because saying it made it matter. I crouched and checked under the stones, then under the grass lip where it met the marker. Nothing. I stood up fast and my head went swimmy for a second. You okay? Dev said, it's gone, I said. The letter Lena left. Maybe it blew away, he said. There's 100 squirrels in here that would love paper, relax. He was probably right. I didn't relax. I followed a wandering path that led uphill toward a stand of pines that were older than the others, trunks wide enough that you couldn't wrap arms around them. The wind came in a long breath and the needles murmured. It sounds stupid to write it. It didn't sound stupid there. Eli, it said again, soft and threaded into the hiss. No one else stood under the trees. A jogger passed on the path 20 yards away, earbuds in. This time the voice didn't make me jolt. It made me angry. What? I said out loud. I know how that sounds. I didn't shout. I just asked like I would if someone had said my name from another room, and I was tired of guessing what they needed. Another breath of wind. The needles leveled their sound. Eli. A second word formed in the tail of it. I couldn't catch it. Dev behind me said, Okay, you're freaking me out a little. I'm not doing anything, I said. I know. That's what's freaking me out. A woman in an ankle-length coat moved along the path, pausing at every other stone like she was counting. She had gray hair pulled into a low twist and a grocery tote hanging from her elbow. When she reached us, she stopped and looked at the trees overhead like she was smelling something on the air. You're hearing it, aren't you? She said. What is it? I asked. She shifted the tote so it didn't cut into her arm. Memory, mostly. It runs through the needles and comes back as something you recognize. My husband always says it's physics. Just air finding ways to move through obstacles and our dumb brains make it into words. He won't come with me because he doesn't want to hear his father. I come because I do. What do you hear? Dev asked. Songs, she said. The ones my mother sang when she cooked. I can't carry a tune and she couldn't either. And it comes out wrong in the best possible way. Like the trees took pity on us and tried to hum. Sometimes I hear my name. Sometimes it's a word I was trying not to say. Sometimes it's nothing and I leave disappointed like it owes me something. It doesn't, it's just wind. But I talk back anyway. I don't think it minds, she smiled and kept going, the tote bumping her hip. Dev looked at me and mouthed, You owe me $5 for this field trip. I didn't laugh, we didn't stay long. The wind picked up and pushed a line of ripples across the pond and the pines threw long bars of shadow that made it look like the ground was a rib cage. We said thanks to the woman at the gate on the way out. Walsh, I read again on the badge. How long have you worked here? I asked. Too long, she said. Since my brother came home from the service and needed something steady. He does grounds. I do this. Do people complain about the pines? Like it gets too much? They complain about everything, she said. They complain that the paths are uneven and the birds make messes and the Hudson is too far to see from Battle Hill. The pines I get calls about are people who stayed long enough to hear something they already knew. That's when they get mad. They think we did it to them. We didn't. You should go before it gets dark. It looks pretty at dusk, but it's not for everyone. When I got home, Lena was on the couch in a hoodie and socks, a box of tissues next to her knee. Her cheeks were blotchy from sleep. I made us tea and told her we'd gone, and she said, Did you see it? See what? I went back yesterday, she said. I felt stupid about making you come with me at night. I figured I could put the letter better, you know, so it wouldn't blow away. But it wasn't there. I thought maybe a groundskeeper took it. I looked around and saw something wedged in the roots under that big pine on the hill. It was my letter. It wasn't ruined. Just damp. I pulled it out and it had turned over and my handwriting looked like someone else had added to it on the back in pencil. But it was my pencil because I left it tucked in. That doesn't make sense. It said, I heard you. I'm still here. Jesus, I said. You're sure you didn't write that? I'm not losing my mind, she said. I brought it home. It's in the drawer. She wasn't lying. The paper was soft like it had been in someone's jacket, and the pencil line on the back was faint and uneven like somebody wrote against a rough surface. It didn't look like my mother's handwriting. It didn't look like Lena's. It didn't look like anyone's in particular. Which somehow was worse. After that, the wind wasn't an idea anymore. It was a thing that had touched a thing in our kitchen drawer. It was a voice that had formed a word it had no reason to form. I told myself I didn't believe in ghosts. Then I told myself that if there were ghosts, they had bigger problems than us. I said a lot of things and none of them made the voicemail stop. They came every few nights. Always late. Always with that pocket sound and the surf hiss, and then, either in the sound or in the silence after it, my name. Sometimes it was clearer than others. Once there was a different name, Lena. And I didn't play that one for her because she was finally sleeping without waking up crying, and I didn't want to give it back to her. The night before Thanksgiving, the coffee shop closed early and Dev and I met for a beer at the dive across from the laundromat. It was raining in that straight-down soaking way that makes the whole block look like a bad watercolor. He fiddled with his glass and said, I want to ask you something. Don't freak out. Every time someone starts with that, I freak out, I said. I want to go at night, he said. I want to hear it the way you heard it. I want to see if there's anything like, I don't know, a pattern. No, I said, you don't have to come, he said quickly. I can go with Jess, she's into this stuff. I just thought you might want to be there to control the narrative. You want to bring my ex to a cemetery, in the rain to listen to trees whisper my name. You can see how that sounds when you say it out loud, he said. I'm not messing with you. I can tell this is eating you. Sometimes when something eats you, it goes away when you walk straight into its mouth. I'm not a therapist. I just think I'd rather be there with you in the dark than know you're walking past it alone every night. He made an okay point. I told him I'd think about it. Then we each had another beer and made the kind of jokes that keep you from saying the earnest thing you almost said. I went home and tried to sleep and woke up at 3:11 to another voicemail. We went the following Monday because it felt better to put a date on it than dread the idea forever. It was cold enough to burn your lungs a little. The city was between holidays and felt hungover. Walsh was at the gate again, tucked into a parka, breath fogging. We close at 5, she said. You can do a quick loop. No exploring. No catacombs. We're just visiting family, Dev said, and I wanted to kill him for saying it like that. She let us in. The sun went down fast. There's a point at the pond where it's not sunset, it's just like the color got turned down 2 clicks. The pines kept their shape against the dim sky, and the wind came in small, steady taps like someone drumming fingers on a table to think. We didn't say much. Dev had his hands jammed in his pockets and his jaw set. He isn't brave, he's stubborn. There's a difference. We were under the big hill pines when the first real gust came. It hit the trunk and translated into that stomach sound, a bass note under everything. I braced without meaning to. The needles shook and the sound rolled through them, and my name came in 3 parts like it had to climb a long staircase to get out. Eli. Eli. Dev turned and looked at me without humor, and he nodded once. He'd heard it. Okay, he said. Okay. Then it said another word. It wasn't a word I'd ever wanted to hear. It was my mother's middle name. It was nothing anyone alive says unless they're using her full name. The wind carried it like a piece of thread through a needle, and then it was through, and I had to grab the bark to steady myself. What did it say? Dev asked. Nothing, I said. My voice sounded like I'd swallowed ice. It said something, he said. Don't lie to me right now, I told him. He stood very still, and then he said, all right. We're done. I didn't argue. We turned to go, and that's when we saw the light. Greenwood isn't lit like a park. There are a few lamps near the roads and none on the smaller paths. And after dark, it's all shadow and the occasional plane blinking through clouds overhead. But maybe 30 yards away, down the slope, a square of the dark seemed brighter and then dimmer, like someone had opened a door and closed it. Dev put his hand out in front of me like you'd do with a kid even though I'm older than him. Probably a car on Fort Hamilton Parkway, he said. We waited. It came again. The wind fell in a pocket as if the trees were listening. The light pulsed once, twice, and then held steady like someone had propped the door open. It wasn't a car. It was too still. It was too even. It looked like the kind of yellow you get from old bulbs, The nice kind they use in dining rooms so everyone looks softer. It was coming from a door I hadn't noticed before, set into the side of a hill, half hidden by overgrown shrubs. The door had ironwork on it and a slot for a key. The kind of door that belongs to places you don't go unless you belong to them, and we didn't belong to anything there. "Tell me you see that," Dev said. "I see it," I said. "Tell me we're not going," he said. "We're not going," I said, and we both knew we were lying. We went because people always do. You can tell yourself 1,000 good reasons to walk away and your feet don't care. The light made a path through the needles on the ground. The air smelled like mildew and old stone. The wind dropped completely as if the door drank it. There was a little brass plaque near the ground that had gone green, and I couldn't read the name. The glass behind the ironwork had a layer of dust on the inside like skin. "Knock," Dev said, and he laughed once and swallowed the sound. "Shut up," I said, and I reached for the handle because of course I did. It was cold and arced to sting into my palm like metal will in winter. The door gave a fraction like a person exhaling and then held. There was a sound from inside that was probably nothing. Probably the settling of air or a drain somewhere, but it lifted the hair on my neck. A low, even whisper began somewhere above us, ran through the pine to our right, then down the slope like a thing with legs. It didn't form my name. It formed a sentence that I didn't catch because my heart was in my throat. Dev flinched backward and his heel hit a flat marker, and he windmilled to keep from going down. The whisper came again. "Don't be late," it said, in the exact cadence my mother used when we were kids and she'd call from the kitchen while we put on shoes in the hall. It wasn't her voice. That made it worse. "We're leaving," Dev said, not looking at me. He had his hand on my sleeve like I was the one who might run. "We're leaving," I said. We backed up. The door's light didn't change. The wind picked up and the pines resumed their busy talk like someone had cleared their throat in a meeting and said anyway. We walked fast, then faster. Then we were almost jogging past the pond and the angel on the hill and the big stone with a weeping woman carved into it. I didn't look behind us because I didn't want to ask that question. Walsh was at the gate, key ready for the lock. "You boys look like you found the cold," she said. "Do you have a door down there?" "In the hill?" I said. "Like a service thing?" "We have a few," she said. "No one's in them at night. Not who clocks in with me, anyway." "It had a light," Dev said. "No, it didn't," she said, not unkindly. "You saw something reflected. Fort Hamilton throws weird. Go home, have soup, drink water. You'll be fine." She let us out and the air hit different on the street, warmer in a way that made me feel sick with relief. We walked in silence to the corner and then Dev said, "We're not going back." "We're not," I said. "You're going to get more of those voicemails," he said. "They're going to get worse." "Why say that?" I said. "Because they will," he said. "And then they'll stop. That's how these things go." He was right about the first part. They came every night for a week, then every other night, then twice in one night like a kid testing a boundary. The words never got clearer than that first late-night voicemail, but the cadence did. "My name, the middle name. Don't be late." Once, in the gray between sleeping and standing up, I thought I heard the other thing my mother used to say when we were out the door and half down the stairs. "Coats," the wind said, not from my phone but from the street rising past the glass. "Coats." Lena stopped talking about the letter and then she started again. "I threw it away," she said one morning, pale and resolute like someone who'd broken up with a person who kept calling. "I don't want second drafts on grief. I don't want to explain myself to the air." "You didn't keep a picture?" I asked. "No," she said. "Do you think I should have?" "No," I said and meant it. December came. The pines held their dark shape against the sky while everything else thinned and went brittle. I changed my route home on nights I closed, not because I believed anything would follow me, but because choosing a different block felt like getting to say one small no. Dev texted me a video of snow flurries catching the lamplight and I didn't open it because I was trying to make my mind quieter. I thought about therapy. I thought about calling Walsh and asking her if she had ever heard her name and what she did about it when she did. I thought about telling our mother's cousin upstate, the one who sends us holiday cards with cardinals on them and handwrites prayers in the margins. On the night it stopped, I woke at 3:11 out of habit, stared at the dark, and waited. Nothing. I lay there with my heart pushing against my ribs and nothing came. It didn't come at 3:12 or at 3:30 or at 4. I fell asleep around 5:15 while the radiators clanged themselves into morning, and when I woke up, The world had the wrong texture because something was missing. I know the sensible thing is to take that as an answer. The tree said what it needed to say, or my brain got bored, or whatever combination of physics and memory and grief had been playing me softened and let go. That's the version you can tell yourself at work while you listen to milk steam, and people ask for gluten-free muffins you don't have. And for most of the day I managed it, like a person who doesn't scratch a healing scab. At closing, I took the trash out to the curb and the night felt like a room with one light on somewhere you can't find. Not spooky, not special, just a little wrong. I locked up, waved to the guy who lives over the bodega and always smokes on his stoop in slippers, and walked toward 23rd out of habit. At the corner I stopped because I didn't want to pass the fence, because stopping because you don't want to is the same as going because you do. I turned up 7th and took the long way. A block from the apartment, a Norfolk pine someone had left on their stoop for pickup shifted in the wind. Its branches were sparse, its trunk wrapped in red foil that had gone dull. The wind moved through it and made a whisper so small you could pretend you hadn't heard it if you wanted. It didn't say my name. It didn't say anything I could put letters to. It made a shape I recognized in the sound, the way you recognize a person you knew as a kid from a single tilt of their head across a room 20 years later. I stood there a long minute, and then went upstairs. Lena was reading on the couch, the kind of thriller we used to pass back and forth when we were teenagers, all short chapters and cheap shocks. She looked up. "Anything?" she said. "Nothing," I said. "Good," she said, and after a second, "Good." The next week I couldn't stand it and went to Greenwood alone at lunch. It was bright and ugly out, the kind of winter sun that makes everything look dusty. Walsh wasn't at the gate. A different guard stamped my wrist with half a crown in purple ink like a club would. I walked the loop to the pond. The pines stood where they had always stood. I didn't hear my name. I sat on a cold bench and watched a red-tailed hawk circle and drop toward some unlucky thing in the grass. I said out loud to the empty air, "I'm here." Nothing answered in any way you'd put in a story. That was a relief, and it wasn't. Back at home that night, I made dinner and didn't check my phone and didn't check it again. Dev texted me a picture of a shoe he'd found on the sidewalk with a joke about hauntings that I didn't dignify with a response. Around midnight, I finally turned the screen over on the table. No voicemails. I stood by the window and listened to the city be the city. Somewhere a bus hissed. Somewhere a couple fought kindly in Spanish. Down the hall, someone coughed. "I don't have an ending for you." That's the truth that makes people mad when they want you to wrap it with a bow. My mother didn't speak to me from the beyond, except she did if you count the way the wind found her shape inside my head and offered it back. My sister didn't get an answer, except she did, if you count a pencil line in her own script that she doesn't remember writing. The door in the hill had no light, except there was one, and then there wasn't. And I'm sure of what I saw the way you are sure your own hand is your own, until someone asks you to describe it while you're not looking. The pines carry voices in the wind because wind needs a thing to move through to make a sound. And grief needs a thing to move through to become bearable. That's the closest I get to meaning. Sometimes I still walk the long way home. Sometimes I pass the fence and put my fingers through the bars like a kid even though I know better. If the air is right, I hear something that could be my name and could be not. On bad nights, I want it to be clear again because clear is easier to live with than maybe. On good nights, the sound is just sound. And I'm grateful to be small under tall trees in a city that doesn't care if I'm scared or not. 2 days ago, I cleaned out the kitchen drawer. I found rubber bands that had melted into one long worm and 8 takeout menus from restaurants that closed during the pandemic. The letter was gone, like Lena said. In the back corner under a felt pad, I found the 5-cent pencil we keep for notes. The point was dull. The wood smelled faintly of sap. That doesn't mean anything except that wood smells like wood. I sharpened it and wrote milk, coffee, light bulbs on a scrap of paper and left the pencil next to the salt. Around 3 in the morning, when that old habit woke me like a phantom limb, I lay quietly and listened. There was no voicemail. There was the radiator's tick, a car passing in the wet street, the building settling. Then just as I was falling back under, a stitch of wind came in around the window frame and ran through the fern hanging near the glass, and the leaves shook. And for a second, the tiny sound they made became something I thought I recognized. Not a name, not an order, not anything I could be mad at. It was the shape my mother used to make when she didn't want to say goodbye, so she said, "See you?" Like it was a promise. I said "see you" back into the dark because that felt right. And the apartment held the words, and the night took them, and I slept. I didn't grow up believing in ghosts. I'm from the southwest side of Chicago, and the only things I trusted were CTA schedules and the smell of fresh snow that meant your car was about to get stuck on a side street till March. If you told me a place was haunted, I assumed you were trying to scare a kid or sell a t-shirt. Resurrection Cemetery was one of those names you just knew. Like Archer Avenue, like White Sox heartbreak. People talked about Resurrection Mary the way they talked about the Bears' chances. Everybody had a cousin whose friend swore they'd seen her hitchhiking in a white dress. It was a story you roll your eyes at because it's fun to roll your eyes. I kept rolling my eyes until the night I heard a child crying by the gates. This was last November, the week after daylight savings kicked our guts in. It was that kind of wet, bony cold where your fingers never warm up no matter how long you hold the paper cup. I worked a late shift at a print shop in Summit, the sort of place that does postcards and funeral prayer cards and flyers with too many fonts. My coworker Jess and I were locking up a little after midnight because our boss had us run a rush job for some church raffle. My cousin Nate swung by to pick us up. His car, an old Altima with one glowing headlight, was idling with the heat up louder than the radio. We were all punchy tired in that way that makes bad coffee taste good. Dunkin' on 79th is open all night, Nate said, drumming the steering wheel. Or we could hit the Speedway on Archer. You two want anything? Just get me something that feels like it's scalding regret, Jess said, pulling her scarf up to her nose. She was the kind of person who always looked ready to laugh at something even when she wasn't. I climbed into the back and dumped my backpack on the seat beside me. The windows were fogged in that halo way streetlights get when it's misting, and when Nate pulled away from the curb, the wipers squeaked a little too loud. Archer Avenue was quiet, a couple of semis rolling past like huge, slow fish. We drove toward Justice without talking much, the kind of silence that's not awkward because everyone's exhausted. We passed the Catholic cemetery sign, the big stone one with the letters that catch your headlights and look older than your grandparents. I'd gone past it 100 times, never inside. The iron gates were closed but not chained, and there was just enough mist to make them look like a drawing of themselves. And that's when we heard it. A small sound, like a hiccup at first, then a breathy sob. Nate turned down the radio without saying anything. Jess sat up in her seat. "Did you hear that?" she said. "I thought that was your phone," Nate said. "My phone doesn't cry," Jess said, and then, a beat later, "Not anymore." I leaned forward, put my hand on the back of Jess's seat. "It was outside," I said. "Usually when you think you hear something from the street, it's a trick of your own car. Coffee lids squeaking, air in the vents. But this sound wasn't inside. It was outside. It had the open, empty quality of night around it." Nate slowed and pulled onto the gravel shoulder across from the cemetery. Our headlights washed over the bars. That's when I saw the small shape. At first it was just dark, something like a person, but too short, too still. Then the shape moved and a small head lifted. It looked like a kid in a thin hoodie. He was standing just behind the iron bars, hands threaded through at the bottom where the bars didn't meet the stone. His forehead leaned against the metal like someone waiting for a ride that wasn't coming. "Oh my God," Jess said, halfway out of her seatbelt already. "Is that Nate hit his hazards?" The tick-tick-tick sounded too loud. He put the car in park and kept one hand on the shifter. "We can't just leave a kid there," he said. The little sob came again, shivery and wet. I looked at the time on the dash, 12:43 a.m. There were stories you heard in the neighborhood about people luring you out of your car. But this wasn't a man waving a fake baby carrier. This was a child crying by the gates of a cemetery. Everything in me said it wasn't right. "I'll just check," I said, already reaching for the door handle because some part of me, the part that remembers my sister's boy getting lost at the Taste of Chicago for 20 awful minutes, had its own gravity. Jess beat me to it. "I'll go with you," she said, and we stepped into the cold that smells like ice water. The gravel crunched under our shoes. Nate's head was turned, watching us. The kid didn't run when we approached. That seemed wrong too. "Hey, buddy," Jess said, her voice low and bright. The one people use for frightened animals and lost toddlers. "Are you okay?" "Where are your parents?" No answer at first. Then a small voice, so thin I had to lean in to catch it. "She's not here." Jess squatted so she wasn't towering over him. "Who isn't?" "My mom," the kid said. In the glow from our headlights, I could see his hands through the bars. Tiny fingers clenched pink-white on iron black with November damp. No gloves. The hoodie sleeves were too short, exposing wrists. Something in my stomach went cold in a different way. "What's your name?" I asked. "Because that's what you're supposed to ask." "What's your mom's name?" "We can call her." The kid pressed his forehead to the bar and didn't answer. It crossed my mind to go around the wall to find the keeper's gate, to get him out of the cold. But there was something else that didn't fit. His hoodie looked wrong. Not wrong like dirty or torn. Wrong like it wasn't made of the same fabric as everything else around us. It didn't catch light right. It was a pale color, maybe gray, but every time I blinked it seemed different, like it was trying on shades of itself. Nate honked once, a small beep that said, "Hurry up." The kid flinched. In that half-second of motion, I noticed another thing. There was no breath plume from his mouth. Mine hung in the air like little ghosts. Jess's did too. The boys didn't. "Hey," Jess said softly, ignoring my sidelong look. "Can you step back from the gate? We're going to get someone to help, okay? It's too cold for you to be out here." He finally looked up at her. His face was an oval in the light. Pale in a way I would have called sick kid pale if not for the way the skin didn't catch shadow right. His eyes looked wet like he'd been crying hard for a long time. There was a little line of moisture under his nose. "Don't leave me," he said. "We're not," Jess said, immediate. "We're right here." "Don't leave me here," he said again, gripping the bars like a much older person. Then his little fingers slid off and he stepped back into the dark a single pace, as if something behind him had tugged his hood. Jess made a choice, then I wish she hadn't. She reached through the lowest gap, trying to touch his hand. "It's okay," she said. "I've got you." He was just beyond reach. His face creased up like he was going to cry more, but what came out wasn't a sob. It was the word please, drawn out too long for a kid that small, like a violin note that doesn't end. Something rattled behind us. We both jerked. It was just Nate, popping the trunk to look for something, a blanket maybe, or the cheap toolkit he kept meaning to upgrade. When we turned back, the boy wasn't there. He hadn't run. There were no footsteps. He didn't duck behind the stone column because there was nowhere to go in that direction, only the gate. On the gravel shoulder behind us, tires hissed past, a sedan swooshing by like a wave. There was an empty minute where nobody spoke. The night pressed against my ears. "Did you—" Jess started, but she didn't finish. Nate jogged up, holding his old Blackhawks hoodie. "Where'd the kid go?" We didn't answer him. We stepped to the gate and peered in. The mist made everything just a little less clear than it should be. The avenue of bare trees. The rectangle of light that must have been the caretaker's house. A low shape that could have been a grounds truck or just a dark bush. No small figure in a hoodie. No sound. "Maybe he ran back," Jess said, but her voice said she didn't believe it. "Maybe he saw us and got scared." Nate glanced at me then. "We should call the cops. Or the caretaker. Sign 111 at least." "Yeah," I said, already digging out my phone. I had bars. The call connected. I started to explain, feeling the ridiculousness of my own mouth. "We saw a kid at the cemetery gate. He says his mom isn't there. He disappeared." The operator asked for the cross street, and when I said Archer outside Resurrection, there was a pause. "Sir," she said, tone clipped into professional neutral. "We've had calls in that area before. Officers will be dispatched. Please remain in your vehicle." "In our vehicle?" I said. "I'm not leaving if a kid's—" "Remain in your vehicle," she said again, firmer. And then the call died. Not dropped. Dead. The phone screen didn't say "call failed." It was like the universe hit mute on the whole road. Jess and I walked back across the gravel. Nate tossed the hoodie into the passenger seat and climbed behind the wheel. I was halfway into the back when I saw them. 2 small wet handprints on the rear driver's side window. The kind toddlers leave at the aquarium when they press their palms to the glass. Tiny crescent nails, a little smear where a thumb had slid. The prints faced inward, like the hands had been pressed from the outside toward us. Water beaded and slid and didn't freeze. "Did you—" I started, knowing the answer. Jess saw it too. She didn't swear. She just went quiet. The kind of quiet where your eyes get wider. Nate looked at our faces and then at the window. He went still. "I didn't— no one—" His voice had that crack the first time fear gets into it. "Get in," he said, like that solved a math problem. We did. He pulled away from the shoulder, turned onto Archer and drove like we'd remembered an appointment. I twisted in my seat to look, because that's what you do when you're trying not to think about what you saw. The gate was a shape getting smaller. For a second, only one. I thought I saw the little form again between two trees, but that might have been my brain trying to sew things back up. We didn't talk until the speedway light came up. Nate pulled in too fast and the tires bumped the concrete stop. He swore under his breath in a normal way and put the car in park. The station lights felt obscene. When we got out, I checked the window again. The prints were still there. Not fog, not dust. Wet. Two little shapes, as if a kid had pressed cold hands to the glass and then let go. The water didn't bead the way rain does. It clung, soft-edged. Just touched one with a careful finger. It wasn't sticky or weird. It was just water. Yet when she swiped, the print reappeared like the moisture was underneath the top layer of glass. "Okay," Nate said, voice too bright. "I'm going to get coffee. You two want to stand here and do your ghost CSI thing, or should I bring it out?" "Hot chocolate," Jess said, like it was any night. "2 sugars. I'll pay you back." "Coffee, black," I said automatically. "Hey, leave the car running?" Nate made a face at his single working headlight like he could will the other back on, then went inside. Jess and I stood there with our breath making white puffs in the light and looked at the prints. I held my hand up next to them. The fingers were half as long as mine. "A toddler? Maybe 4?" she said at first. There was no breath. I didn't answer. She went on anyway, in that voice you use when you're walking yourself through something that isn't behaving. "You saw it too, right? The kid. He had snot under his nose. His eyes were wet. He was crying. But when he talked, there was no..." She exhaled a cloud to prove her point. "You know." "No," I said. "I know." Inside the station, a woman at the register laughed at something Nate said. Her laugh cut off midway, as if someone had put a hand on the top of her head and pressed down. The automatic doors opened and a guy in a construction jacket came in, stomping his boots. The ordinary world kept happening in there. That felt wrong too. When Nate came back out with a cardboard tray, his face was the color of printer paper. "The clerk," he said without preface, "asked if we just came from Resurrection." "Why?" Jess asked, guarding her voice again. He balanced the tray on the roof and shrugged like he didn't want to think about the answer. Said kids in hoodies were the new thing. Couple weeks now. People stopping, seeing one, hearing crying. Some come in with handprints. She said one guy had them on the inside. We didn't say anything about that. We didn't say, not yet. We drove to the all-night diner on 79th because we needed a table and fluorescent lights and a waitress named Donna, who'd call us baby and fill our mugs without asking. The place smelled like hot syrup and fryer oil that needed changing. A guy in a bear's hat was asleep in a corner booth with a plate of untouched pancakes cooling in front of him. 2 paramedics in uniform took turns nudging each other awake. We took the back booth near the bathrooms. I checked the window again before sitting. The prints were still there. If anything, they'd gotten clearer. Tiny lines at the center like the start of whirls. I took a photo because that's what you do now when anything is weird. The picture came out fine. The whirls didn't. Where they should have been, there was a smear of light as if the glass had caught a reflection from inside itself. Donna was exactly who we needed. She had hair that had once been dyed a fierce red and was now fading like old fire. And she'd seen everything. She called us sweetie and poured coffee and didn't hurry us even though we looked like trouble. "You all look like you saw a deer go through your car," she said. "Or like you went past the big cemetery late." Nate stiffened. Jess looked at me under her lashes. "People come in sometimes this time of year," Donna continued, uninterested in our poker faces. "They have that exact look, like a chalk outline of a look. I tell them to sit, sugar up, and not drive Archer again tonight." She set a little jar of creamer cups on the table. "There's fog there even when there isn't, you know what I mean?" I nodded because I did. There are places where the air feels like it has a memory faster than yours. "You see Mary?" she asked, mostly for fun, like someone asking if we caught the Cubs game. "A kid," Jess said before she could stop herself. "A little boy in a hoodie." At the gate, Donna's face did something I didn't expect. It went blank in a gentle way, like someone covering a child with a blanket. "Oh," she said. "That one? That one?" I repeated. She poured more coffee, though our cups were full. "They shut down a part of the river walk last month. They found something in the water." That's what my nephew said anyway. I don't know. It's always a story around here, right? But then my cousin's friend saw a kid crying there, and then 2 nights later her car had little handprints on it, so... She shrugged at the ceiling as if to ask it why it let these things happen. "You don't have to believe anything." It still happens. We ate eggs we couldn't taste and bacon that felt like chewing paper. I went to the bathroom and splashed cold water on my face and looked at my reflection. The mirror was too clean for a place like this. Somebody had scrubbed the ghosts out of it last week. On the way back to the table, I passed the vestibule. The door was glass, and beyond it, our car stood under the streetlight. In the reflection on the door, the handprints looked like they were inside the car. Two small shapes on the inside of the back window, like a child had tried to push his way out. When I opened the door just to shift an angle, they went back to being outside. When the bill came, Donna slid something else onto the table with the receipt. It was a little prayer card, the kind I could recognize by feel with my eyes closed, having boxed 1,000 of them at work. It had a picture of a lamb and a shepherd and gold edging. "I keep a few by the register," she said, as if we'd asked. "People like to take something when they leave here after telling me things. They think it helps." I didn't want to accept it, which is how I knew I would. I put it in my backpack because it was easier than leaving it on the table like an accusation. When we stood to go, Donna touched my sleeve. "Don't stop if you hear it again," she said, looking at the side of my face instead of my eyes. "That's the thing everyone gets wrong. You can't help what you can't lift." Outside, the cold had deepened. It crept up under my jacket cuffs and gnawed at the bones. Nate started the car. The rear defroster ticked on, a soft electric hum. Jess leaned forward and turned the heat up a notch. The windows fogged, then cleared. The handprints didn't fade. They only looked glossier, as if the heat had woken them. We had a quiet fight about what to do next without calling it a fight. Nate wanted to drive the long way around, avoid Archer, get home, and lock the world out. Jess wanted to go back to make sure there wasn't an actual kid wandering in the cold. Ghost story be damned. I sat there like a stone in a river, letting their words wash around me. I checked my phone. The 911 call sat in my recent calls with no duration attached, like I dialed and then changed my mind. I opened the photo of the handprints. The whorls were still missing, but something else had appeared. A faint arc above one of the prints, the kind kids make with their palm heel when they slide down glass. It hadn't been there when I took the shot. "Let's just drive back by," I said, finally, surprising myself. "We don't have to stop. We'll just look. If it's nothing, we go home." Nate stared down Archer like he could bend it with will alone. 10 miles out of the way," he said, and then, "Okay, quick." We drove slower this time. The mist had thickened into something that wasn't fog but behaved like it, just enough to make the world look like a copy of itself. The chain-link fence near the railroad tracks had a lace of silver on it, as if someone had drawn the frost with a pencil. Jess didn't speak. Her hands were knotted in her lap, one thumbnail worrying a cuticle until it turned raw. The gate appeared out of the night like it had been waiting. The hazard lights of a squad car flashed down the road a little ways, painting the trees rhythmic red-blue. An officer stood in the road talking to someone I couldn't see. The radio crackle carried in the air like the static before lightning. Nate eased past the squad and the officer didn't stop us. At the gate, our headlights swept over the bars again. The place behind them was just shapes, a hedge, a line of stones, a path that disappeared into dark. No small figure. Jess let out a breath like someone who'd been under too long. "Okay," she said, and then the sound came again. It was not loud. It wasn't theatrical. It was a child crying in the way exhausted kids cry, small and steady and bewildered. It didn't come from where our eyes were looking. It came from directly behind my right ear. "Don't stop," Nate said, this time to himself. He pressed the gas and the car rolled forward. The crying followed. It moved with us a few inches from my ear, and then slid like an audio trick across the car to Jess's side. I saw her shoulders go up around her ears and then force themselves down. She kept her eyes on the dashboard because she is brave and because looking anywhere else would have been surrender. I don't know why I turned then, but I did. I looked into the rear window, into our reflection, into the night beyond our glass. For a heartbeat, I saw him in the seat beside me. He looked like he had at the gate, too pale, too solid in some places and not enough in others. He was sitting upright with his hands on his knees like a child told to behave in church. There was water beaded on his hoodie like he'd come in from rain, and none of it slid off onto the seat. His eyes were raw around the edges, small red crescents like the world had sanded down the lids. "Where's your mom?" I asked because I didn't know what else to do. My voice came out normal. It should not have. He looked at me like I'd asked a question in a language he'd almost forgotten. "She's here," he said, and glanced straight ahead through the windshield past Nate's head toward the gate. "She's here." he said again, smaller. She won't turn around. I followed his eyes without meaning to. The officer down the road had his hand on the door of the squad now. The radio crackled something that sounded like a street name. The cemetery gate loomed and fell away. The crying hiccuped and stopped. In the sudden silence, the back of my neck went cold like someone had opened a freezer. Jess whispered, "He's in the car." "I know," I said. Nate gripped the wheel like it could take light from his skin. "Don't stop," he said for a third time, and I heard the word please inside the syllables. When we hit the first intersection, the light was red. No cars were coming. Archer at 1:20 a.m. is a suggestion more than a road. We slowed. We did not stop. "Go," Jess said, her voice thin and flat. Nate went. The car rolled through the red like a cough. The crying started again behind my left ear this time. It was quieter, as if the sound itself was getting tired. I reached into my backpack without thinking about why and found the prayer card Donna had slipped us. I didn't know what I intended to do with it. I only knew that when I held it in my palm, the crying changed. It didn't stop. It changed. The rhythm of it stuttered like someone taking a breath between sobs to say a name. "What is that?" Jess asked. "A card," I said. "A prayer card. For who?" I turned it over. There was no name. Just the shepherd and the lamb and a blank space where, at the shop, we'd print the dead person's name in looping font. I thought of my hands feeding stacks of them into the box, the way the paper edges bite your fingers if you're not careful. I thought of how many babies and toddlers we'd printed over the years. The way their photos make your brain feel like it's sliding sideways for a second because a face like that shouldn't belong on a card like that. "Maybe it just helps," I said. Not to Jess and not to the kid, but to the seatbelt webbing and the dashboard dust and the part of the night that felt like it was listening. Nate turned off Archer onto a side street without deciding to. It was an old habit from when we were teenagers and took weird routes home to avoid buying gas. The houses here had small front yards and porch lights that looked brave instead of bright. He pulled over across from a little brick bungalow with a plastic goose on the steps wearing a scarf. He put the car in park and breathed through his nose 3 times like a swimmer. No one spoke. Outside, a dog barked twice, then gave up. Somewhere in the distance, a train moaned. The sound slid thin by the cold. I held the prayer card out behind me without turning around, the way you'd hand a tissue to a crying kid in the back seat on a long drive. "Here," I said, "if you want it." Nothing touched the card. The crying didn't change. I kept my arm there until it started to ache, then set the card down on the seat beside me. It slid toward the center like there was the faintest tilt to the car. It stopped half under my backpack. We sat like that until the heater started making its little chemical heat smell. Then Jess did something that didn't make sense until it did. She took off the scarf she'd had around her neck and folded it into a square like she was going to wrap something small. She leaned back slowly as if not to startle a bird. "If you're cold," she said, "you can have this." Her hand hovered over empty air. She set the scarf on the seat gently, like it was covering a pair of knees. She pulled her hand back slow, fingers uncurling like someone easing away from a sleeping baby's foot. The crying stopped. The silence came back thick and impossible. A minute passed. 2. The heater exhaled. I could hear Nate swallow. "Okay," I said, and my voice shook for the first time. "Okay." Nate drove. We didn't take Archer. We took every stupid side street we could string together until we were so far from the cemetery, the air lost the taste of it. We dropped Jess at her place first. She stood on the curb and looked at me through the back window in a way that made me think of funerals. She touched the glass where the prints were and left no print of her own. She gave a small, tight nod to the empty seat beside me, the way people nod at a new neighbor. Then she went inside. Nate dropped me next. He didn't say his usual "text me when you're in." He just watched me cross to my door. When I turned to wave, his brake lights flared and went out like a heartbeat. I slept with the hall light on like a kid. In the morning, the scarf was still on the seat beside me in the car, folded in a way Jess wouldn't have folded it. The handprints were gone. The glass had a faint film of something like mineral residue, if you looked at it from the right angle in full sun, as if someone had pressed a damp thing there a long time ago, and it had evaporated into the molecule version of itself. I kept the prayer card in my backpack. I didn't show it to anyone for a week. On the 7th day, I pulled it out at work to look at it under the shop lights, thinking I might throw it away because I didn't like having it. When I turned it over, the blank space where a name should go wasn't blank anymore. There was a watermark there, faint as a breath on a window, a pattern that looked like half-formed letters, maybe the start of an M, maybe the curl of an S. When I showed Jess, she closed her eyes for a second and then opened them like someone bracing for a wave. We didn't go back to Archer at night after that. We didn't talk about the boy the way people talk about a movie they saw once. Once in a while we'd be driving and a light would turn red and Nate would slow and not stop, and none of us would correct him. In February, when it snowed enough to make gutters look like ice cake, I drove past Resurrection in daylight because I had to go that way for an errand. I didn't look at the gate. I kept my eyes on the road the way a kid keeps his eyes on the floor when there's a thing in the corner of the room he doesn't want to see. My rear-view mirror caught iron bars and winter sky and the suggestion of a small shape that might have been a bush dusted with snow. It might have been a bush. It might have been something else. A month later, on a wet morning that smelled like worms, a customer came into the print shop with a USB drive and a tight mouth. He needed prayer cards. He pushed the file across the counter like it was a bill he didn't want to pay. The photo was of a woman in her late 20s holding a child on her lap. The kid had a hoodie on with the hood down. His face was turned a little away from the camera, as if someone had called his name from the side. The photo quality was poor, a scan of a photocopy of a memory. "What's the name?" I asked, because that's my job. The man said it and my brain registered it and then immediately forgot it, the way sometimes a word passes through you without catching. "And the child?" I asked, because the kid was right there in the photo. "Do you want his name included?" The man shook his head. "No," he said in that voice of people trying to carry something by themselves. "Just hers." We printed them on the good linen paper because I didn't feel like being cheap that day. When I boxed them up, one card slid out and landed face down on the counter. I picked it up and there, in the space where we'd printed the woman's name, was a faint wet crescent like the heel of a child's palm had pressed it and then lifted. I wiped it with the edge of my shirt. It didn't smear. When I held it up to the light, it disappeared. When I set it down, it came back. I put it at the bottom of the stack where the man wouldn't see it, not because I was afraid he'd think I'd done something wrong, but because I didn't know what he'd think. And sometimes mercy is just leaving a person one more thing they don't have to carry. That night it rained, the kind that makes the city smell clean for an hour before the buses forget and grind it all back into black. I went to my car and the windows were fogged from the weather shift. I sat there for a second with the key not turned, just listening to the tinks and pings of metal cooling that cars make when no one's paying attention. I breathed out and drew a lazy arc on the fogged glass the way you do when you're a kid. The arc cleared and then blurred, and when it blurred, 5 smaller arcs rose underneath it like fish surfacing, 5 tiny finger swipes from the inside, out, right where a child's hand would be if he'd been sitting there waiting for someone to look. I turned on the defroster and watched them fade. They didn't smear, they didn't drip. They receded, not like water but like a decision. Once in a while, if I have to drive Archer late, I'll catch myself looking at the gates. I won't stop. I hear Donna's voice in my head. You can't help what you can't lift. But I've started doing one thing I never used to. If I hear a child crying in any place I know is empty, I say out loud, even if it's embarrassing, even if I'm alone in the car, I'm here. I don't say, it's okay, because it isn't. I say, I'm here. Sometimes when the air is the temperature of a hand you haven't warmed yet, I swear I hear a small sound after. Not words. Just a tiny breath that might be a thank you or might be nothing at all. And once, moving past the iron in a light rain with the street as quiet as a church after everyone has left, I saw 2 little wet handprints appear on the gate itself. Circles of darker black on black, and then vanish as if they'd never been there except in the moment I saw them. You don't have to believe me. I wouldn't blame you if you didn't. It's easier to file this in the drawer where the white dress girls live, where highway ghosts stick their thumbs out and vanish by the time you turn your head. But if you drive Archer late and the mist makes every light look like a halo, and you pass the gates and hear a sound like a kid trying not to cry, keep your eyes on the road and your hands on the wheel. Don't stop, don't be cruel, just say you're there. Sometimes that's enough to keep small, cold hands from finding your glass again. Sometimes it isn't. That's the part you don't get to decide. I wasn't looking for anything supernatural that night. I was looking for Wi-Fi and tacos. The plan was to help my friend Maya set up her ofrenda for the Dia de los Muertos festival at Hollywood Forever, then hit a late-night spot on Melrose. We'd been there a dozen times for summer movie nights, spread out on the Fairbanks lawn with thousands of other people, the projector beam skimming over headstones while everyone pretended not to step on anybody famous on the way to the bathrooms. The cemetery never felt creepy with a band playing and teenagers running around, and a massive screen showing old horror movies. It felt like Los Angeles at its most harmless and hip. This was different. This was a week before the festival. After closing, the gates locked behind the last tour. Maya had a volunteer badge and an email from the event coordinator saying we could come in to assemble the altar pieces at night because the daytime crews were overbooked. She brought her cousin Luis and I brought a step stool because she's 5'2", and the photo banner she made was 8 feet long. It was simple. A family altar with marigolds and a candy skull she iced herself, and a shoebox full of black and white photos. Her abuela, a cousin, a dog named Nacho in sunglasses, and a great-grandfather in a uniform that looked almost too crisp to be real. We checked in with the night security guy at the front office, a squat little building that looks like it should sell maps to the stars but instead sells urns. He was older, the sort of older you see in LA where the tan never goes away. His name tag said Frank. He slid the logbook toward us and squinted over the top while we wrote our names. "You folks know the rules?" he asked. "Stay with your group. Don't go in any mausoleum unless a staffer props it open for you. Don't touch any existing altars. Lights out in the big buildings except the main hall by Valentino, but you don't need to be in there anyway." "We're at the wall by the lake," Maya said. She had this bright, polite voice she used for authority figures. "We'll be quick." Frank nodded and then, almost as an afterthought, said, "And don't walk the mausoleum halls alone." Luis laughed a little too loud. Like a dare, Frank didn't laugh. He just slid a pen into the spine of the logbook and set it aside like he was closing a Bible. "Old habit," he said. An old guard used to say it to me when I was new. "Never walk the halls alone. The dead don't like to be counted by one." "The dead don't like to be counted by one," Maya repeated, amused. "Creepy." "Yeah," Frank said, "creepy. Y'all be safe." We crossed the grounds with our tote bags and the step stool and a battery lantern that made everything look too bright and too flat. The cemetery is different at night. The palms are motionless towers. The Hollywood sign floats like a cheap decal on the hills. Paramount's water tower is a ghostly circle over the wall, and you can hear the hum of the city like a giant refrigerator. The lake sat black and glassy, with ducks ghosting across it like wind-up toys. We passed a cat that looked like it had learned to ignore people 100 years ago. Maya's spot was between two cypress trees, facing a low stone wall. She had planned everything on graph paper. Where each orange square was a marigold. Luis started to unzip the bag of fake flowers and I clipped the twine to the top edge of the wall so we could hang the photo banner. It was easy, normal. We made small talk and traded jokes and accused Luis of slacking when he got lost in his phone. It was probably around 9 when the first thing happened. Not a big thing, just a smell. While I was looping the twine, a sharp odor snuck in under the scent of marigolds and cut grass, metal and oil and something smoky. It reminded me of my grandpa's garage in Bakersfield. Kerosene, the old space heater he swore was safe and my mom said would burn the house down. I figured one of the grounds crews must have left a can open nearby, or someone was testing generators for the festival. But the smell came in waves like someone was walking past with it. Maya wrinkled her nose. "What is that? Did Luis rip one?" Luis didn't look up. "What, I'm the only person here? That's discrimination." "It's like a lantern," I said without thinking. "Like lamp oil." "Who still uses lanterns?" Maya said. "Walgreens sells LED candles that smell like eucalyptus now." We laughed and went back to work. The smell faded, then returned, then was gone again. The second thing was a sound. Maya had me climb the stool to get a better angle on the banner while she started arranging the marigolds. I was clipping plastic to stone and thinking about tacos when I heard a jingle that didn't belong to any of us. Not phone chimes. Not the metallic clink of the step stool. It was the sound of keys. Not the modern kind on a ring with car fobs and keychains, but a bunch of long metal keys like a jailer might carry. They rang once, twice, faint, like the wind moved them. But there was no wind. Luis heard it too. "Do you hear that?" "Keys," I said. I looked across the lawn. The office lights were distant and warm. The rest of the grounds were dark except for the occasional garden lamp that made little halos around the pathways. Along the wall of the Abbey of the Psalms mausoleum, some of the windows had security lights behind stained glass, making soft colors that didn't travel far. No moving flashlights, no cars, no people. Probably Frank, Maya said. Doing rounds. Frank Jingles, Louise said in a spooky voice. Frank Jingles and the dead don't like it. Shut up and hand me the scissors, Maya said. We finished the banner and stepped back to admire it. In the lantern's light, Maya's great-grandfather stared out serious and handsome, the buttons of his jacket catching the glow. Her abuela looked like she could step out of the frame and tell us we did it wrong. Maya touched both pictures with 2 fingers and closed her eyes for a second. Just like her mom does, a small prayer, a moment of connection. It made the place feel less like a park with famous bones under it and more like what it is, a big, quiet neighborhood of people. The third thing was a shadow that shouldn't have been there. I noticed it because our lantern made all the shadows flat and predictable, except for one that fell across our altar from the path behind us and moved like someone had just walked by. I turned, expecting to see a staffer with a clipboard. There was no one on the path. Did you see that? I asked. My voice came out lower than I meant. See what? Maya said, distracted by a stubborn bit of tape. Nothing, I said, because nothing is the easiest thing to say when you don't want to alarm your friends. We went on like that for another hour. Maya placed her candles in sugar skull. Luis arranged the paper banners in neat triangles and corrected me on my knots. We had to run back to the car for extra tape, which meant passing along the edge of the cathedral mausoleum. The door was closed and chained, the way Frank had said it would be after hours. Inside somewhere I could hear a faint tapping like water from an old radiator. When we came back with the tape, the door was still chained, but the smell of lamp oil was stronger near it, and I found myself glancing at the iron hasp, thinking about keys. The last thing before it really started was my fault. Maya had printed a long strip of her family names to go under the photos, and she asked me to hold it taut while she checked the alignment. I crouched to one knee on the walkway stones and a tiny puff of dust came up, the kind that gets in your nose and makes you sneeze later. And there it was again, the smell of kerosene, heavier this time, like I was kneeling next to something soaked in it. I fought the urge to look around like a kid who thinks a clown is standing behind him, and then I heard a man's voice, far away but clear enough to understand, checking doors. I looked at Luis. He was biting off a piece of tape. Maya said, "What? Did you hear that?" I asked too loud. "Hear what?" Maya said. "Checking doors," I said. "A guy said it." Luis stood up slowly. He had the guilty look he gets when he's about to make a joke and then decides not to. "Okay," he said. "We're all hearing things. Let's finish the candles and then bounce." We did. Fast. The last row of votives went down crooked because Maya's hands were shaking a tiny bit, and she pretends they never shake. We took the step stool and the empty tote to the car and came back with the box of photos Maya wanted to store in one of the staff lockers overnight. The lockers are in a side office by the Abbey building. Frank had written the combination on a post-it and stuck it to the box, which felt a little like we were testing fate. The side office looks like every maintenance office in every school district in America. Beige walls, safety posters, a calendar with a muscle car for a month that isn't this month. The locker we got was number 12. When I swung it open, the smell hit me so hard I rocked back on my heels. Lamp oil, sweet and metallic and old. I touched the back of the locker and my fingers came away slightly slick. "Someone's going to complain about you guys keeping gasoline next to the W-2 forms," I said, trying to be funny, but my voice sounded wrong. Too harsh for the small room. Luis took the box from Maya and slid it in next to an old toolbox and a ring of zip ties. A second later, he froze. "Yo, what?" Maya said. He held up an object that had been pushed against the back wall. It was a matchbox, the cheap cardboard kind, faded pink, the striker worn down and clogging the air with that rotten egg scratch smell. You see them at diners under the register. Little ads for local businesses. This one was stamped with a logo that looked hand-drawn, a lantern with rays, and beneath it stamped in navy ink, Hollywood Memorial Park, night staff. That name was old. They changed it to Hollywood Forever years ago. "That's a prop," Maya said, but she didn't sound convinced. "It's like the OG business card," Luis said. He flipped it open. It had 3 unused matches left. He closed it quickly and slid it back where he found it, like it might belong to someone who'd come looking. When we stepped out of the office, all the distant little lights seemed farther away. "We should tell Frank about the oil," Maya said. But we didn't. We told ourselves he probably already knew. We were almost done. And then Maya remembered she wanted one last photo, a Polaroid of the altar lit up. She handed me the lantern. She wanted her hands in the shot. Luis backed up to frame it, the little camera whining in his hand. He was 3 steps into the grass when he tilted his head. "Hang on," he said. "Can we get the stained glass in the background? It'll look sick." The closest stained glass was in the Abbey building. Its side door, one of those narrow, decorative ones with a bronze handle, was propped with a rubber wedge. I used my foot to set it more firmly, thinking of Frank's rules without meaning to. The hall beyond was dim but not dark. The sconces were on along the first corridor, the ones with frosted glass that make a buttery light. Luis wanted a light source behind the glass, so he asked me to carry the lantern inside for a second and set it near the window. "I'll be 2 seconds," I said. "Count." Maya said, "I'm timing you," and pulled out her phone to prove it. I took the lantern and stepped into the hall. If you haven't been inside an old mausoleum at night, I can't explain the silence, not exactly. It's like a soundproof room in a music studio combined with a church right before a wedding starts. The kind of silence that seems to be composed of 100 small sounds you're not quite hearing. Paper, cloth breath, the marble under my sneakers amplified each footstep into a slow clap. The air was 10 degrees cooler and tasted faintly of stone dust and old flowers. The names on the walls were familiar. Producers, actors, people who had money long after death. The sconces made a calm, prosperous glow that didn't reach very far. The lantern felt heavy suddenly, heavier than it was outside. My finger slipped a little on the handle. I set it down on a brass stand near the stained glass, angled so the vegetable green and ocean blue glass lit up. It was pretty. For 1 second, all I felt was the aesthetics, the way the light turned the stone honey-colored. I moved to leave. That's when the wedge under the door fell over. I heard it, a little rubber thump, and turned in time to see the door whisper itself closed. Not slammed, not even shut, just closed. The sound of the latch was small, like the last note of a song. I took 3 steps in that bright, smooth silence and put my hand on the handle. It didn't budge. "Hey," I called, laughing before I could stop myself. The laughter rang down the corridor for too long. "Okay, prank captured, very funny." No answer. The door had a small wired glass window. Through it I could see Maya's silhouette and the shape of Luis's shoulders moving. I could see the white square of the Polaroid spit out. I could see them glance up and realize the door was closed. Maya tried the handle from her side. It didn't budge either. "We'll get Frank," she said through the door. Muffled, distant. "Don't move." "Don't move," I echoed, which is the same as saying, "Now I'm going to move." I've been locked in worse places, elevators, a garage once when I was a kid. And the trick is to find the next exit, the next call box. Anything that proves your problem is an inconvenience and not fate. I told myself there would be another door farther down the hall, probably with one of those crash bars that always feel illegal to push in a place like this. The lantern, 5 steps behind me, flickered. The air tasted like kerosene now, sharp enough to sting the back of my throat. "Checking doors," a man's voice said, closer this time, behind me in the hall where I'd just walked. I turned and the lantern flame steadied, a small golden coin on its little wick, a tidy circle of light. Beyond it, the corridor lay empty and glossy. The light skimmed the polished marble and ran into the darkness where the sconces stopped. The brass plaques in the stone caught glints and threw them back. The smell thickened, sweet and iron and old. Somewhere deeper in, a single tap sounded, metal on metal, measured like a key rapping once against a ring. "Hello?" I said, immediately wishing I hadn't. "Frank? It's me, Never walk the halls alone," the voice said, almost conversational. "Never have. Never will." Something moved at the edge of the light. Not a person. A shadow, the shape you see when someone steps around a corner one corridor over and the light bends. It was very patient. It waited for me to move toward it. My heart beat in my ears so loud I almost didn't hear the keys again, that delicate chime. I picked up the lantern. It was heavier than it had any right to be. I told myself it was a prop, some old display the cemetery brings out for festivals, but the handle was warm and the glass chimed when I bumped it with my knuckle, and the heat was real on my wrist. "Sir?" I said because I grew up polite. I got locked in. If you could... Checking doors, the voice said again, calm as an appointment. I couldn't place it. It didn't sound like an old movie guard or a modern one. It sounded like the thing itself, the idea of a night watch given shape. I walked toward the corner where the shadow had been. The hall took a right and then another right, forming a square. At the next corner, the light caught on a shine that turned out to be the polish of a shoe. The old thick leather kind. Not a sneaker. It vanished when I lifted the lantern higher. The sconces along this stretch were dead. My lantern was the only light and it painted everything in amber. Names lined the walls, dozens per section. Empty vases waiting for flowers in some places. Fresh bouquets in others that didn't make sense, given the hour. I passed a long brass stand where a guest book sat open to a blank page. Beside it lay a pen with a chain. The chain moved, 3 links only, as if someone had just let it go. I told myself to keep going, to find the exit on the far end, to get back to Maya and Luis before they called someone who would charge me a fine. I turned the next corner and stopped. There was a man standing at the far end of the hall. He was backlit, the way people are when they stand in a doorway with light behind them. In his left hand, he held a lantern that made the kind of light my lantern made, but steadier, deeper, like it had a place to be and knew it. He wore a uniform that could have been any era, a dark jacket with a high collar, sleeves too long or hands too big, I couldn't tell. His head was bare. His hair was cut close. He stood very still. The ring of keys hung from a hook at his belt. I could see the arc of metal at his hip, the way the weight pulled the fabric. "Sir," I said. My voice came out whisper small. "I'm locked in." He lifted the lantern slightly and the light carved a second hallway out of the air between us. "Never walk the halls alone," he said. He had the tired patience of someone saying a rule he's said for 30 years. "I didn't mean to," I said, immediately sounding like a child. "The door..." He turned and started walking away. It should have annoyed me. It didn't. It made sense that I should follow. I did, because the alternative was to stand still until my courage dried up. I followed his pool of light. We took a left, then a right, then a left again. I noticed absurd things because my brain was trying to catalog the ordinary, to defend against the not ordinary. A hairline crack shaped like a river delta in one tile. A smudge on a nameplate where someone had kissed it with lipstick. A dried petal curled like a fingernail. The lantern's smell moved with us, steady and close. "Sir?" I tried again. Do you work nights?" "Always," he said. "How long have you been here?" I don't know why I asked. There were better questions. What is the nearest exit? Do you have a radio? Will I get fined? Instead, I asked the question that made the hair lift on my arms even as it left my mouth. He looked at me over his shoulder. In the amber light, his face was clearer for a moment. He was middle-aged, lines at the corners of his eyes, a nose that had been broken once and healed proud, a mouth that didn't smile or frown, just held on. There was a sheen to his skin that looked like sweat but felt older, like the way brass shines when it's been rubbed many times. His eyes were very tired. "Long enough to know every door," he said. "Long enough to forget the names of the new ones." We turned another corner. The smell of kerosene grew sweet-heavy, and something else came with it. A coolness that felt like stepping into shade after a long time in the sun. The hall opened into a small rotunda with a domed ceiling. The lantern light climbed the curve and stopped. There were 4 corridors leading out. He took the second. I took the second. The marble amplified the key jingle into a thin music. Somewhere far behind us, too far given the number of turns, I heard Maya's voice call my name. It sounded like she was outside and I was underwater. "Almost done," the man said, and I realized he was answering a question I hadn't asked. "Last rounds." "Right," I said, because what else do you say to that? We came to a door with a crash bar. He didn't touch it. He stood to one side so I could... I pushed and felt the bar give the way metal gives when it's been pushed a million times. The door didn't open onto the path where my friends were. It opened onto another hall, narrower, with a concrete floor painted gray and marked with yellow lines like the back hall of a theater. The light switch on the wall had a metal guard. He lifted his lantern higher and the shadows stepped back a little. "This way?" I asked, my voice empty of anything except the expectation that I would obey. He nodded once. Precise. We walked down the service corridor past racks of folded chairs and stands for flower arrangements and 2 dolly carts with scuffed wheels. A sign on a door read mechanical. Another read deliveries. The only sound was the small glass tick of the lantern as the heat moved it, and the distant hum of the city, thin as a wire. At the end of the corridor was a second door, this one with a square of wired glass like the one I'd come in through. Behind it, darkness. He set his lantern down on a metal table and produced a key from the ring. He didn't fumble. He didn't search. He picked one without looking and slid it into the lock, and when he turned it, the sound was not like modern locks, all cartridges and smooth cylinders. It was like two pieces of iron having a conversation. The door opened onto the night air. It wasn't the exact exit I'd hoped for, but it was outside. I breathed and tasted the lake and the cut grass and the faint, clean rot of flowers, and beneath that, one last pulse of lamp oil. The sky over Paramount's wall was a pale haze. The palms were black strokes against it. "Thank you," I said, turning to him with so much relief I almost laughed. He was looking past me, toward the lawns. His eyes moved the way people's eyes move when they're counting heads, making sure everyone who came in goes out again. He nodded once. "Stay with your group," he said. "Don't touch what you didn't bring. Don't make me count by one." I wanted to ask him his name. I wanted to ask him if he was the old night guard Frank had mentioned. Not because I believed I had been walking with a ghost. I didn't. Not then. But because the question was stacked like a spring in my chest and wanted to release. "What's your—" He picked up his lantern. The glass chimed. "Checking doors," he said almost to himself and turned back into the corridor. The door closed, and when it did, it made that same last note sound, a small, complete click. Maya and Luis found me 30 seconds later. Or that's what they said. Maya's face was pale. She grabbed my arm hard enough to bruise. "Are you messing with me?" she said. "Is this like you doing bit?" "I got locked in," I said, suddenly embarrassed by how shaken I was. "It's fine. A staff guy helped me out." Luis looked at the door, looked at me. "What staff guy?" "Night guard," I said. "Old uniform, keys," he said. I stopped. I didn't want to say the line out loud in the open night. It felt like I'd be writing it down on a contract. "We went to get Frank," Maya said, like she was making a case to a judge. He wasn't at the office. I called the number on the volunteer sheet. It went to voicemail. I turned around and the door was closed and you weren't answering. "That was 3 minutes ago." "It was more like 20, I said. My watch said 9:47. It had been 9:15 when I went in. I showed it to them and felt childish and certain and scared all at once. The numbers glowed like a dare. He took me through the back hall. "There's no back hall here," Luis said, but he didn't sound like he believed himself. He chewed his lower lip. He does that when he's trying not to show he's afraid. "We should go." "Let me tell Frank about the door," I said, because somehow the rules mattered more now than they had before. "And the oil." "There's a locker with tomorrow," Maya said. "During the day, please." We walked the long way around the lake without talking much. The cats watched us from the edges like the neighborhood association. When we got to the office, the lights were on, but Frank wasn't there. The logbook lay where he'd left it. The pen was gone. We could have waited. We didn't. Outside the gates, Melrose was its usual messy self. Neon pizza signs, scooters abandoned like driftwood, teenagers in thrifted jackets auditioning their cool. My car smelled like French fries and dust and our lanterns plastic. Normal smells that rushed in like an antidote. At Maya's apartment, I took the step stool out of the trunk and my hand came away with a faint smear on my palm. I rubbed it with my thumb and it left a shiny streak before soaking into my skin. It smelled like lamp oil. I didn't sleep. I lay in my bed with the blinds half open, watched the squares of car light bump across my ceiling, and tried to tell myself a story that put me back in charge. A staff guy had helped me. The staff guy had a fondness for old uniforms, or he was part of a reenactment, or the cemetery had a fun little living history element for the festival. The lost time was adrenaline. The smell was a coincidence. If I didn't call what happened a haunting, it wasn't one. In the morning, my phone had 2 texts from Maya. One was a photo she'd taken right before I went inside. The altar looked beautiful and a little proud, the way art does when it knows it worked. The stained glass glowed behind it. In the reflection on the glass, this could be a trick of the angle, a smudge, a thought that already knows what it wants to see. You could make out a smaller square of light deeper inside, a lantern. The second text was simpler. "Can you go with me to drop off the fresh flowers today?" "I don't want to go alone," I went. We went together, because that's what you do when a place asks you to respect its rules. The grounds were crowded with volunteers and painters and families with armfuls of marigolds. The air smelled like the inside of a florist shop and the outside of a bakery. Frank was at the desk this time, and when I told him about the door closing and the man who helped me, he took it in like he'd been waiting. "Tall man?" he asked. "Yes," I said, surprised at the accuracy of that tiny detail being the right detail to choose. "Older, lantern, keys on a ring like a movie," Frank nodded. "Ray," he said, almost fond. "Raymond Delgado. Worked here 32 years. Had a saying about the halls. You heard it. Never walk the halls alone," I said, and the hairs on my arms noticed we were saying it in daylight. "That's the one," Frank said. He reached into a drawer and took out a laminated card, the kind of thing you put next to a donation box. It was a little memorial they'd made for staff years ago, a row of small black and white photos, each with a name and the years they worked. In the third spot was a man with that same broken-heeled nose and that same set-mouth patience. The caption read, "Raymond Delgado, Night Patrol, 1968-2000. He die on the job?" Luis asked quietly. Frank shrugged one shoulder. "Heart," he said. "In his chair, they think. Found him in the morning. Lantern on the desk, keys hung neat. He made every round twice if he had time. People said he was thorough. He was superstitious. He'd say the dead don't like to be counted by one." I told him he was dramatic. He said he wasn't talking about them. He was talking about us. "I don't get it," I said, and I'm not sure he did either, but saying it made a shape around the feeling I'd had in the corridor. The sense that I had been in the wrong. Not because I'd broken a lock, but because I'd turned myself into a solo number in a place that does not prefer solos. On the way out, Maya wanted to check the locker to grab something she forgot. We walked to the side office. The door was ajar. Locker 12 was open. On the top shelf sat the matchbox with the lantern logo, right where Luis had put it back. Except the striker wasn't worn down anymore. It looked new, the gritty strip clean and bright. The matches inside were gone. The back of the locker had a small, precise smear of oil on it in the shape of a thumbprint. I looked at my own thumb and could still smell the faint ghost of it there. We didn't say anything because what do you say that doesn't sound like you're daring the place to prove you wrong? We closed the locker gently. We went back outside. The cats watched us approve or disapprove of their kingdom. The lake had that fake real look water gets when light hits it just right. I've been back to Hollywood forever since. You can't live here and not go. Friends visit from out of town and ask to see Valentino. In the summer, someone always has an extra ticket for a movie. I go with them. I walk the nice open paths. I sit on the grass. I leave before the crowds thin too much. I never go inside the halls at night. I don't even cut through the cool, quiet galleries during the day if I'm alone. If someone needs to use the bathroom and the only one open is inside, I go with them, because that's the rule. Stay with your group. Don't touch what you didn't bring. Don't make anyone count by one. Once on my way past the Abbey building in bright noon, I thought I saw a small glow behind a stained glass panel, an ember's worth, and heard, under the buzz of the city, a single key ring chime. I told myself it was the maintenance crew in the wind. I told myself a lot of things. That night in my apartment's hallway, the sensor light outside my door flicked on even though I'd been perfectly still, and a strip of warm light crept under the apartment across from mine, as if someone were standing just inside with a lantern, politely making sure that everyone who came in would go out again. I turn that light off every time I pass it. I do it without thinking now. The same way some people touch a crucifix or knock on wood. Routine keeps the world from rearranging itself into something you don't recognize. Routine and company. When my friends ask where to go for tacos after the cemetery, I tell them a place that is crowded and loud and bright. We order too much and we eat all of it. We sit close enough to bump elbows. When someone gets up to use the restroom, someone else goes with them, because that's not superstition. Not in a city like this. It's courtesy. It's a way of saying to the dark, we are counted. We are plural. We belong to one another. If I'm alone and there's no avoiding a hallway, I walk quickly. Not running, not disrespectful, just brisk enough to say I have somewhere to be and people to meet. And sometimes when the building is especially quiet and the air carries a smell I can't name until later, I hear it under my breath, a line that has become a prayer. Or maybe a promise never walk the halls alone. The dead don't like to be counted by one. And neither do we. If you're thinking about taking one of those evening cemetery tours in Savannah, because it sounds quirky and harmless, hear me out first. I'm not trying to sell drama. I'm not trying to make a video or go viral in a Facebook group. I just want to put down what happened to me, my girlfriend Nora, and our friend Luis on a warm Saturday in late spring, inside Bonaventure Cemetery, near the statue of a little girl named Gracie. I was the skeptic of our group. I don't do seances or Ouija boards or anything like that. I like documentaries, old barbecue joints, and walking tours where someone points out brickwork and tells you who built what in 1892. I picked Bonaventure because it's pretty and because the Spanish moss looks like a soft green curtain when the air is thick. That was it. That was the whole pitch. We had driven down from Charleston for a weekend. Nora wanted riverfront photos and pralines. Luis wanted live music on River Street and a beer. I wanted trees and quiet, and a place to walk where you can smell the salt in the wind. We booked an evening cemetery tour that promised history with a hint of mystery. The group was a mixed bunch. 2 girls in matching Savannah bachelorette sashes, a retired couple from Ohio who kept holding hands, a guy in a Braves hat, and a student with a camera who told us she was doing a project on funerary art. Our guide, a tall woman named Lila with an easy voice, carried a little lantern and a binder of laminated photos. She said the lantern was for ambiance. It barely did anything against the coming dark, but it did make the moss glow like it was underwater. Bonaventure is not all gothic drama. Parts of it are just neat, tidy paths and bright azalea shrubs and polished family plots. You hear the river somewhere past the trees. You hear insects. The sky was low and heavy that night, the way it gets before a storm, and you could feel the air cooling in a layered way, warm against your face, cool around your ankles. Lila walked us down the lane, pointing out names and telling stories. A stone angel missing a hand, a marble lamb that people rub for luck even though they're not supposed to, the famous musician buried not far off who fans still toast with miniature bottles. Every now and then she would stop and let the group take photos, and the student would step into the grass to get a better angle, and you could hear the damp blades brush her jeans. At first the strangeness was the kind you can talk yourself out of. We passed a stand of live oaks and I felt a temperature dip along my legs that made me think of stepping into a grocery store refrigerated aisle. It lasted 3 seconds. I rubbed my hands over my shins to move the feeling along. Nora said she had goosebumps and laughed. Luis said something about the river breeze and the way heat can pool in pockets. I agreed because it felt like the exact kind of thing wind does in a place with trees and water and carved stone that holds the day's warmth. We reached the Gracie statue right as the sun gave up and the first streetlights from the distant road started to show on the underside of the clouds. If you don't know it, the statue is of a little girl sitting very straight in a carved chair, hands folded in her lap, hair parted and tied. The sort of child who looks like she could stand up and correct your posture. She's behind a low iron fence and people leave things, toys mostly, small stuffed animals with weathered fur, plastic bracelets, notes folded into squares. There were coins lined up on the fence post caps. Someone had tied a white ribbon to the latch and it stirred a little on its own, though there wasn't much of a breeze. "Treat her with respect, please," Lila said, and her voice changed when she said it. Not dramatic, just a little more careful. No touching.
"She's a work of art and a memorial."
People have felt little tugs on their coats here. If you do, be polite, say hello, tell her your name. You can say you're just visiting and you're going to leave everything as you found it. The bachelorette girls squeezed each other's arms and whispered. The retired couple stood a little back. The guy in the Braves hat hung near the edge of our group with his phone up like he was looking for bars. The student took pictures along the fence line. Kneeling so low she almost touched the gravel. I was standing just off to the left of the gate, between the coin-topped posts, when something brushed my shirt sleeve. It was so small a touch that at first I thought a strand of moss had loosened and drifted. It felt like 2 fingers grazing the fabric and catching for a second. Not a bug, not a thorn, a pressure. I glanced down and there wasn't anything there. My shirt was just a plain blue button-down with sleeves rolled up to my elbows. The touch had been near my wrist where the cuff folded back on itself. I didn't say anything, not because I was trying to be brave, but because it was the first minute at the statue and I didn't want to be the guy making a scene. Then the pressure came back, firmer this time, closing on the cuff like a little hand tucking fingers into a fold and giving a careful tug. It was weird because the strength didn't match the size. It felt child-sized and intent. Picture a kid trying to get a parent to go somewhere they've already decided on. "Hello," I said quietly, because it felt insane to say hello to air, but the words came out before I could stop them. "My name is Daniel. We're just visiting." Nora looked over. "You good?" "Yeah," I said, and I shook my wrist because the feeling had become a pinch. It let go and then it didn't. It was like letting go, then tightening again a few inches farther down as if the hand had slid and gripped again. My skin prickled. The air smelled suddenly like flowers, but not the damp, sweet ones from the bushes we'd passed. Sharper, like lilies from a funeral home lobby. I thought about saying that out loud and decided not to. Luis came to stand beside me and ducked his head to look at the toys in the corner. "Somebody left a tiny tea set," he said. "That's actually kind of cute. Do you feel that?" I asked. He frowned, then shook his head. "What?" "Nothing," I said, and then a cool spot touched the inside of my wrist itself, not the fabric. It was as if the cold seeped through my shirt. The cuff shifted minutely. It wasn't my imagination. This is the part that's hard to explain if you weren't there. Your mind does everything it can to find the normal version of what you're experiencing. I checked my cuff button. It was fastened. I looked down for a twig or a thread caught in the iron fence. There was nothing. My skin dimpled where the pressure was, the way it would if a child pressed their fingertips into the soft part of your wrist while they tested how serious you were about leaving. Behind me, the group shifted and murmured. The student was asking Lila a question, and Lila was telling her about the sculptor, about how the details were so fine you could count the buttons on the little dress. Nora took a photo and checked it, and then Luis swore softly under his breath. "My phone just dropped from 80% to 9, he said, and he held it up. The screen was dim. "Come on." The student heard him and made an interested sound. "Mine did that last time I was at Colonial Park," she said. "It came back the next day. I think the cold does something to batteries." Her breath fogged a little when she said cold. I saw it, a short little cloud. I looked for my own breath in the air and saw it too, though it wasn't that kind of night. I lifted my hand and the pressure on my wrist moved with it up and forward, not giving in but not fighting, not hurting yet. My fingers shook. I said hello again, and I felt stupid and sincere at the same time. "Tell her we're not touching anything," Nora said softly. She had come closer and slid her hand into the crook of my elbow. "Tell her we'll be respectful and we're going to leave. We just wanted to see." "We're going to leave," I said, and I kept my voice low because the bachelorette girls were nervously laughing and I didn't want to add to the energy of the group. "We're going to leave things the way we found them." "Thank you." The cold hand tightened. It wasn't angry, but it had a will. Kids do that particular tug when they think they know the way to the car and you're going too slow. It drew my arm toward the gate like it was showing me something. I took one step and my shoe scuffed the gravel, and I heard the slightest sound of something metal tapping metal. A coin fell. It rolled in a half circle at my feet and tipped onto its side. Nora made a small noise, halfway between surprise and something else. Louis said, "No way," and under his breath. The cold pulsed against my skin, then flared like opening a freezer. I could feel the shape of it. 4 fingers and a thumb, small, tighter now, and then it pinched in a way that made me involuntarily pull back. It was like a child trying to keep you from stepping into the street. The pinch was a warning. "Okay," I said. "Okay, we're staying right here." "Everyone doing all right?" Lila asked, and her voice carried the way practiced voices do. She had moved to the other side of the statue and was talking about the hotel where Gracie's father worked, and how people come to bring her gifts. Sometimes folks feel a little pull on their sleeve. If you do, just be polite. The retired man from Ohio cleared his throat and said to his wife, "I feel something odd, like pressure." His wife touched his shoulder. The Braves cap man had lifted his phone again and was trying to get a live photo to work. He shook it like a magic trick. The bachelorette girls had moved a few steps away and were whispering, their voices bouncing off the iron fence like ping-pong balls. "It's cute, right?" one said. "Until it isn't," the other said. The air around my wrist went from cold to colder and the fingers dug in. It hurt then, a sharp, precise pressure. I tried to pull my arm fully back and it would release, and then the grip would be there again, lower, nearer to my palm. A tug, then a tug, then a series of quick tugs like a small child urging with impatient rhythm, and I found myself leaning in to stop the hurt. When I looked up into the statue's face, it felt like looking at someone who was concentrating on something far away and could not be interrupted. The detail around the eyes made you think she was thinking. "I don't like this," Nora said in a low voice. "You're getting pale." Luis looked down at my wrist and said, "You're red, man." His voice had lost its joking, and that did something to my stomach. Flipped it slightly the way it flips when a car drifts on wet pavement. I stepped back. The grip held. I stepped sideways and it followed, as if whoever was holding me had decided that I was the one who needed to understand whatever she needed to show. I felt ridiculous. I felt scared in a way I hadn't been since I was a kid and got separated from my mother in a grocery store. "Tell her we'll come back in daylight," Nora said. "Tell her we'll bring something. A toy or flowers. Tell her we're sorry if we did something wrong." "I'm sorry," I said aloud. "If I did something wrong, I'm sorry. We'll come back tomorrow. We'll bring something nice." I tried to keep my voice steady. "I promise." Right then, the iron gate latch clicked by itself, the way metal clicks when it cools or shifts on a hinge. It was not loud, but it was deliberate. Everyone heard it. The Bachelorette girls stopped talking. The Braves cap man made a short sound like a hiccup. Lila turned and looked at the gate and then at us. Her face did not change, but she moved toward us. "We're going to walk this way now," she said lightly without looking directly at me. "We've got 1 or 2 more stops before the path gets too dim." My wrist throbbed under the cold and I realized my heart was hammering like I had run. I felt another scent, not lilies this time, but something powdery and clean, like the inside of a blanket chest that has been closed a long time. Then the pressure on my wrist shifted. It wasn't up or down. It was a little push to the side, and my elbow bumped one of the fence posts. On top of that post were 3 coins. They were lined up carefully, shiny side up. The push angled my body so that my sleeve brushed them. One fell. It landed on the gravel near my shoe. It rolled once and stopped. The student with the camera, who had been crouched to photograph the toys inside the fence, lifted her head. She saw the coin and me in the gate and her eyes widened. She closed her mouth in a line like she had decided a frame and wanted to keep it inside her. "Let's go," Nora said, not unkindly, and she wrapped her free hand around the wrist that had become the problem, and her warm skin against the cold made the difference. I felt the small hand withdraw, not like a release, but like a letting go that meant I had agreed to something. We walked away with the group. I didn't look back at the statue, though I wanted to see if anything had changed in the face. I focused on the lantern Lila held and the small gold circle of light it made on the path. My wrist hurt worse as the cold faded, the way your fingers burn when you come back inside after snowball fights. It was a very specific ache, 5 points of pain that made a pattern. I opened and closed my hand like it would help, and the motion made the ache spread in a line up my forearm like ice melting. We stopped at another plot where a statue had lost its head in a storm, and Lila told a story about repairs and insurance, but I couldn't hear any of it. Nora kept looking at me, and Luis did the thing he does when he is worried, which is to make jokes that are meant to be distractions for the person he's worried about. "We're going to get you a balloon animal from River Street, my man, or a giant funnel cake, or both," he said. "You're going to be the first person to get haunted by a kid and fix it with powdered sugar." We laughed a little because it helped. When we got back to the parking lot, the air felt a tiny bit lighter, as if the trees ended and the sky could breathe again. We said goodnight to the group. The retired couple waved. The student took one last photo with a long exposure that made the headlights coming down the road look like ribbons. Lila shook hands and thanked everyone. When she got to me, she paused and looked down at my wrist. Her eyebrows moved almost imperceptibly. "You're okay," she said in a low tone that didn't match her cheerful guide voice. "It happens. Put something cool on it, and do what you said you would." "What did I say I would?" I asked, though I knew. She glanced toward the darkness back up the path. "Come back tomorrow," she said. "Bring something that shows you listened." We got in the car. The dome light seemed too bright. Nora reached across the console and took my hand. She turned my wrist over and made a small sound. 5 distinct red ovals were forming, little fingertip bruises, spaced the way a child's hand might be. Not deep purple yet nude, tender, simple. "Okay," she said. "We're going to the hotel and we're going to put ice on that, and then we're going to go to a toy store in the morning." Luis leaned forward from the back seat to look. He didn't make a joke. He just said, "That is a hand," in a voice that had most of the air squeezed out of it. Back at the hotel, my phone battery, which had been at 70 before the tour, showed 1% and then died while plugged into the wall. Nora ran a washcloth under the tap and wrung it out and held it pressed against my wrist. The cloth warmed instantly against the heat of my skin and the cool under it. I couldn't stop smelling that powdery clean scent mixed with something colder. At some point while I was sitting on the edge of the bed with the cloth on my arm, the air conditioner clicked off, and for a second, I thought I heard humming. Not a song I knew, but the sound a kid makes when they draw and concentrate. "Did you hear that?" I asked, and Nora raised her eyebrows and said she'd heard the AC click. We didn't sleep well. I woke up twice thinking someone had touched my ankle above the blanket, the way a child nudges you when they come to your side of the bed after a nightmare. The second time I woke, the washcloth I had left on the nightstand was on the floor, neatly folded, like the towel animals in cruise ship photos. I did not mention it. In the morning, my wrist looked worse. The bruises had risen to the surface like fingerprints pressing from the other side. When Nora took a picture of them, the photo showed a faint sixth mark on the heel of my hand, as if a thumb had been there all along and the camera could see better than we could. We found a toy store off Broughton and bought a small porcelain teacup, the kind that would look like it belonged to a set. We wrote a note on a clean card because it felt stupid to come back empty-handed after what I had said. I wrote, "Thank you for letting us visit," and signed our names. When we got to Bonaventure, daylight made the paths look less theatrical and more ordinary, and it took away some of the fear and replaced it with a steadier kind of respect. The air was warm with sun and the insects were louder. At the statue, the gate was latched. The toy offerings were as they had been. The coin I had seen roll was no longer on the gravel. It was on the fence post again, lined up with the others, shiny side up. It looked like someone had polished it with a thumb. I don't know if it was the exact same coin. It felt like a thing you don't question. A man in a city maintenance shirt was trimming a hedge not far off. He looked over and gave us a nod without turning off the trimmer, the way men do when they've seen every version of visitors. Nora held the teacup and I held the card. We didn't open the gate, we just set them on the post inside the bars, where people had placed other things. The little porcelain cup looked small and simple and very clean against the iron. I touched the fence with 2 fingers and said, "Thank you," because saying it once more seemed right. The maintenance man turned off his trimmer and walked over like he had been waiting for a reason to stop. He was older than my father, with sun at the corners of his eyes and hands that looked like he had fixed things his whole life. "Y'all okay?" he asked, and his voice had the same unhurried cadence as the river. He looked at my wrist and his eyes did the same tiny movement I had seen from Lila. "Fine," I said. "We had a strange moment last night." He nodded once. "She's little," he said. "Like sleeves. She'll pinch because you got her attention and now she needs to keep it while she thinks. That sounds silly, but that's the way of it." I didn't ask how he knew. He reached into his pocket and took out a folded handkerchief and handed it to me. "Tie that loose for the day," he said. "It ain't magic. It just keeps her from reminding you every time you hang your arms at your sides." I tied it loosely around my wrist like a temporary band. It looked old-fashioned and out of place on me. He nodded, satisfied, and picked up his trimmer again. Before he walked away, he said, almost to himself, "Be polite to the small ones. They carry messages. Half the time the message ain't for you." We walked the paths a while and then left. The teacup looked right behind the bars. On the way back to the car, the wind shifted and the river smell came through the trees. And for a moment I felt the lightest touch on the back of my knee, like a small person hurrying to keep up. It was not cold this time. It was just the pressure that says, "I am here." The bruises deepened over the next day, went yellow a week later, then faded like ordinary bruises. My phone battery returned to behaving normally. Louise sent us a photo he had taken when the student took her long exposure at the lot. In the photo, the lantern light draws a clean circle, and the group is a smudge of shapes. If you zoom in on the fence by the statue, you can see the ribbon on the latch, and you can also see something else that I cannot swear to in good conscience because the brain does tricks with light. It looks like the edge of a dress turning. It looks like motion without a body, a curve in the air the way silk curves when someone changes their mind and takes a step the other way. I have felt that cold hand twice since Savannah. Once at my sister's house when my niece took my hand to show me her new books, And for a second, there was that powdery smell. And my niece looked over my shoulder and said, "Who else came with you?" And then forgot she had said it. Once in a grocery store on a rainy day when a little boy cried by the flower buckets and I reached for lilies without thinking, and stopped because it made my skin go tight. Both times it was the mildest pressure, the kind that makes you turn and look behind you and see nothing except a moment passing through. This part I don't know how to explain, so I will just say it. A month after Savannah, when the bruises were gone and the handkerchief was folded in the back of a drawer with wallet cards and a guitar pick I think I found on Tybee, I woke up at 3 in the morning to a soft clink from the kitchen. I thought I had left a glass near the edge of the counter. I went in and turned on the light. On the table were 3 quarters lined up in a row, shiny side up. We do not leave coins on our table. I reached out and nudged one with my finger. It rocked and lay still, and for a second the room smelled like something clean and sweet and very far away. There are a lot of stories in Savannah, and people will tell you that they're told because tourists want them, and tour companies need them. I believe that. And I also believe objects hold heat and intention the way bricks hold afternoon sun. I don't have an agenda with this. I am not saying the statue is haunted or not haunted, or that a child ghost pinched me to make a point. I am saying a small, cold hand took my sleeve for a purpose I still cannot name, and when I promised in a moment of fear to come back and bring something, I did. I am saying it felt like the right thing to do. If you go, be polite. Keep your hands to yourself. Don't laugh because you're nervous. Don't yell because you want a story. Stand very still and listen after the guide stops talking. You might hear insects, you might hear the river, and you might feel something take your cuff between small, serious fingers and tug in the direction of what comes next. If you do, say hello, say your name, say you're visiting, and you'll leave things as you found them. Keep your promises. And when you leave, check your wrist in the light. If you see 5 small ovals blooming like little moons, you'll know you were noticed. What that means after, I'm still figuring out. But the next time I'm in Savannah, I will bring a matching saucer, and I will not ask for anything in return. I didn't grow up in Baltimore, so the first time I heard people say Old Western Burial Ground, I pictured cowboys and tumbleweeds. It took a few weeks of living here to realize they meant the old cemetery tucked behind Westminster Hall. It sits just off Fayette, stone and iron swallowed by brick and traffic, a wedge of the past welded into a neighborhood of row houses, hospitals, sirens, and the light rail hum. If you walk past during the day, you might not even look twice. At night, it feels like a pocket of dark pressed flat between buildings, waiting for somebody to put a hand in. I started going because of the side gig. My roommate, Danny, found it first. A local preservation nonprofit wanted volunteers to photograph and transcribe old headstones before the rain and moss erased them. It paid a little when you hit weekly quotas. She liked old places and history. I liked paying rent without selling plasma. Her cousin Malik tagged along because he was the kind of guy who said yes to anything that sounded like a story he could tell later. We did a training in a church basement. The room smelled like coffee, floor wax, and damp hymnals, where a woman in a purple blazer told us about respectful conduct and proper documentation. They had permission from the cemetery. We had to wear badges, check in with the caretaker, keep off unstable vault roofs, and never prop the gate open with rocks. The lady said that twice, tapping her clipboard with a metal pen for emphasis. You could get locked in, she added, as if that wasn't the quiet dream of half the people in the room. The caretaker at Westminster, an older guy named Mr. Greer, gave us the key to the small side gate on Green Street and told us about vandalism and teenagers and rats. He had a limp that straightened when he got annoyed and a voice that carried. The first night he unlocked the side gate for us, he gave Danny the kind of look you give a younger person you grudgingly like. "Phone's on full charge," he said. "Stay out of the catacombs. Don't follow anybody you don't know." "We're not here for the ghost tours," Danny said, smiling. "Not the tours, I mean." Mr. Greer turned and tapped the iron fence with his keys. "Every year or two, somebody gets the bright idea they can cut through here to the back. See a light and think it's the exit or security. It never is. Who is it?" Malik asked. He'd leaned his skateboard inside the fence, unhooking his camera bag like a field journalist. "The lantern guy?" He said it in the half-mocking, half-curious tone he used when he wanted someone to prove him wrong. Greer looked at him for a long second. "You see a lantern in here at night, you go the other way." He shrugged like he knew we would do the opposite. "He'll lead you deeper." That's the whole trick. He locked the gate behind him and left us with 3 hours to meet our quota. By day, the place is busy with tours and students, office workers cutting across to make a light. At night, the city folds into itself and skips past the cemetery. The skyline bleeds neon off glass. The burial ground absorbs it and gives nothing back. When I tell this to people, they think I'm making it up because it sounds like the start of a scary story. The darkness was different there, but it's the simplest way I can put it. The streetlights paint the sidewalks in a sick yellow, but the light catches on the fence spikes and stops. Inside, you're in shadow compiled from 100 years of trees. We started at the western slope where the ground heaves up in waves like the land's trying to shrug off its stones. Our badges clicked on our jackets. I held the spotlight. Danny knelt to brush moss off letters. Malik took photos and read names in a mock graveyard announcer's voice to keep us moving. We joked at first about the dust on our knees and the way the earliest stones seemed to say the same handful of names. But the sound of our own voices kept creeping back on a delay, beaten thin by leaves and brick. We lowered our volume without saying anything about it. I smelled kerosene before I ever saw the light. It hit me in a drag of cool air down the back of my throat, oily and old. A smell that didn't belong in a city that has mostly swapped oil lamps for smartphone flashlights. It was faint enough to pretend away. But a few minutes later, when we moved down the lane between 2 rows of ground-level vaults, I saw a stain of light sliding behind a low mausoleum on the south side. "Security?" Danny whispered. She didn't want to spook me, but I heard something in her voice leaning toward eager. She likes the world best when it feels like it might reveal a secret. Maybe. Malik squinted. "I don't hear a radio." The light wasn't a flashlight beam. It was an egg yolk glow, steady and soft. It didn't wake up the stone the way LED does. It pooled, then pulled itself along. I told myself somebody was filming something. People make content everywhere now. And tried not to think about the way Mr. Greer had used the word deeper, like it meant more than distance. We kept working. The lantern glow lapped into our corner from time to time, never close enough to show us the hand that held it. Twice we smelled the kerosene again. Twice we told each other it had to be a neighbor's porch lamp, the wind pushing the scent across. Danny kept doing what she does. Names, dates, soft brush, one careful photo, and I hung onto the job like a raft. That was the first night. On the second night, we hit our rhythm. We met Greer, signed the key out, listened to his same warning, and walked into the dark like we'd already learned how to carry it. The routine can make things feel safe, even when the routine is walking into a graveyard after hours. We worked the north side this time, closer to the wall skinned with vines where you can see the backs of row houses and the glow of unchanged windows, a square of blue TV light in one, warm kitchen in another. People living their lives a fence away. Somewhere around 10, the kerosene smell came harder. It rolled over us with a cold edge and made my eyes want to water. I lifted the light expecting, what? A prank, a man with a lantern and a bad idea, a night watchman. Anything with a body. The glow swam into view, more cloud than blade, slow as someone walking who isn't in a hurry. It bleached the grass colorless. It slid along the side of a vault, and for a second I thought I saw a sleeve, the way fabric looks when something warm moves beneath it. Then nothing but light again. It kept going until the angle put it out of view. "Okay," Malik said, too loud. "I'm supposed to say we should check it out." Danny didn't laugh. She tilted her head like you might hear better if your ear could climb out of your hair. "It's probably Greer, right?" she said. "He was locking the other gate when we came in." "Greer's flashlight has batteries," I said. "And a voice attached to it that would be barking at us by now for not filling out our forms." We didn't go toward the light. Not that night. We stayed with our shapes and our names and our scribbled notes. Only one strange thing happened, 3 times. I wrote down a name and date from a headstone that seemed legible. Say, Rebecca T. in 1842. And when Danny leaned in with the camera, the stone read something else. I'd check again and swear I'd misread the first time, and we'd laugh it off as a trick of hand shadows. Twice as coincidence, 3 times as a draft under the door. I told Greer, and he made a face like an old pain had flared up. "Don't bring chalk," he said. "People think it will make the letters show up. It does more harm than good." "We're not using chalk," Danny said. "We have the soft brush and the spray." He looked at me. "You writing the names, son?" "I am." "Slow down." He tapped the counter with one knuckle. Read everything twice. We went a third night because our weekly quota was close and because quitting in the middle of something you've already told yourself isn't a big deal feels childish. Friday nights in that corner of downtown are white headlights and blue light bars, the smell of fries from a place that stays open too late, a pulsing bass line that finds your bones. But inside Westminster, the sound dampens and whatever comes through does not land right. It's like hearing a party through a wall you're not supposed to open. We started at the southern edge near the fence where the iron spikes don't sit plumb anymore. The ground there is uneven, and your ankles will tell you so the next day. We were doing fine until Malik had to take a call from his cousin about a car part he'd promised to pick up. He stepped toward the fence to get better reception, the way you do even though you know it's dumb. He was 20 feet away, the glow of his screen a square in the dark. Danny and I were both bent over a stone so low it seemed to grow from the dirt like a tooth. The kerosene smell rose. Not a whisper this time, a sharp reach you could have pinched between two fingers. I turned my head and there it was, closer than it had ever been. A lantern's worth of light pushed along by a hand. I swear to you that hand was there for a blink, pale, cuffed in something darker, moving with the deliberate economy of an old person who has done the same motion 1,000 times, and then the light was all there was to see. Malik, I said. He was still on the phone, laughter in his voice, caught in some story about a fender and a wrong size. The light slid between us and him, not touching him, not touching anything, but coming from the angle that you would take if you wanted someone to follow. It slowed in little invitations. My feet felt like they'd learned the choreography without telling my head. Don't, Danny said. Lo, the light moved again, farther away, moving with the patience of a person who knows you're going to catch up. It slipped behind a vaulted tomb and reappeared on the other side. A soft swing as if held from a hook. I took a step, then another, because you can only bluff so long and still be the same person. At 3 steps, the smell went metallic like hot iron after rain. At 5, the city sound thinned to a thread. At 7, the ground started to slope, and I realized the lantern wasn't leading us toward a gate but into the oldest part, where the vault doors are set knee-high into berms, some with padlocks that look decorative now, some with brick mouths collapsed. Malik, Danny said again. He turned his back and was still on the phone, and there was a second of stupid, pure anger in me. I wanted him to be here, in the same fear I was in, to share it, to hold the edges of it, before I pulled my eyes away and discovered he wasn't where I expected. He had been 20 feet away. Now he was 30, or nothing but shadows shaped like trees and stone. I said his name and the ground swallowed it. The light held steady. I could hear Danny breathing next to me, not ragged but careful, like hiking downhill. I said his name again and someone else said mine back. Too soft and much too close. The voice didn't bounce like an echo. It lay down between my name and me and made itself comfortable. Let's go, Danny said. She reached for my sleeve and I didn't take my eyes off the light because I had a stupid thought. If I don't look away, it can't move without me knowing where it goes. You want rules even if they're ones you made up in. The time it takes your heart to punch. Twice. If you think this would be the moment when Malik cried out and we ran and the light went frantic in the cemetery, dissolved into some maze we didn't recognize. I know that's how these stories usually go. What actually happened was quieter and so much worse. The lantern drifted back a step. The light didn't jump, it pulled like a person backing away to make room. The kerosene smell leaned close up my nose and down my neck. The voice that had said my name said it again. But this time it was my mother's voice, soft and small the way she said it when she wanted me to come look at a bird's nest or a red sky. I had not heard her say my name like that since I left home. She is alive. She was at her house. She was not inside an old cemetery in Maryland. My brain knew that. My knees did not. I took one false step, heel slipping on damp grass, and almost fell. Danny's fingers bit my arm hard enough to make a bruise I found 2 days later. We are not following that, she said in a voice I've only heard once before. When a car ran the light while we were crossing and she pulled me back with both hands and her whole weight. We turned away from the light, which resisted like a current. That's the word that feels right. It wasn't a person pulling. It was a water going the other way feeling. Every step away was a step against something. We moved side by side, not running but not running. The way you walk fast when you know a dog is loose but you don't want to trigger the chase. The ground went softer. The stones went older. The names on them went thinner, then thicker, then a script I don't know. The city noise rattled like a coin stuck in the dryer. The smell of oil fell behind us, then surged ahead as if the light had gone around and was waiting at the next bend. I have walked in the woods at night and found the road by listening for its hum. I have followed the smell of a river. There's an inner compass for those things that your body knows even when you think you don't. In that cemetery, my inner compass spun. It wasn't that I didn't know where the gate was. It was that every part of me knew a different answer. The left side of my body said Green Street. The right said Fayette. My chest said down. My ankles said back up. If you've ever been caught in a rip current, you know the tug of that wrongness, how it feels personal, like the water knows your name. Get low, Danny said. We both crouched, and she put her cheek to the ground like she was listening for trains as a kid. It looked ridiculous, and I almost laughed. And then I realized she was listening to the traffic for direction, and I did the same. The dirt was cold and smelled like something turned under. Close to the ground, the city sounds found us again. Not where they should be, but stable. You could point to a direction and trust the point. You could hear sirens and underlying wheel noise and a cough that belonged to an old bus. There, she said. We went that way. The light moved left, then right, then settled in the corner of my vision like a fruit fly that wouldn't leave. We didn't look. There is a kind of defiance that's just paying attention to the right things. We didn't look. We counted vaults. We tripped over a route I recognized from earlier in the week, and my heart did that wild gallop it does when you see your street again after getting turned around in a neighborhood you don't know. The fence came into view like bones under skin, and we aimed for it, shoulders and knees and complaint. When we got there, the gate was locked. We had the key. Danny fumbled it out of her pocket, and it snagged the lining and the light. Slower now. Slower in that hateful, patient way. Slid in behind us. Open it, I said, not angry, not loud. Just focused on the metal in front of me like I could bend it with my mouth if I had to. I'm trying. Her hands weren't shaking. Mine were. She found the lock. She put the key in. It didn't turn. She pulled it out and put it in again because sometimes that's all that fixes anything. It turned. The gate gave a little, then more, then we were through, and the night air on the sidewalk felt thin and cheap and alive. The light stopped at the threshold, and I didn't realize I was waiting to see if it could pass through the iron until it didn't. It hung there like a small sun, then drifted back into the green. We closed the gate, and I held it shut while Danny locked it, both of us breathing like we'd run a long staircase. I turned, and there was a man walking up the sidewalk with his hood up and his hands in his pockets. He wasn't a ghost. He was a guy on his phone. He looked at us like we were idiots and stepped around. The sound of cars on green was ordinary. A kid rolled past on a scooter. The night was the night again. If you've ever been inside something strange and then stepped out into the common and watched it not care, you know the thin, scared laugh that comes out of you then, the one that has a little edge in it like a broken cup. We waited another 5 minutes, calling for Malik, pressing our faces to the fence like nosy kids. Then we saw him walk up from the far side, shoulders hunched, still on his call. Except when he reached us, he said his phone had died half an hour ago. We argued about time right there, me leaning over the spikes and saying, "You were right there," and him shaking his head and saying he had walked left to get a bar and then the cemetery had looked different, which, he said, he knew was stupid. He looked pale and a little ashamed, as if he'd let in a draft he hadn't meant to invite. We didn't tell Greer we'd almost followed a light. We signed the key back with hands that looked like our hands and went home to our apartment where the hallway always smells faintly of someone else's cooking and paint. I didn't sleep. That's not dramatic. I just didn't. Every time my eyes closed, my inner map turned itself over and couldn't find north. At 3 a.m, the apartment went quiet in that way it only does between full stops of the city. I smelled kerosene and told myself I didn't. I got up and opened the window, then closed it because the air outside smelled like wet brick and trash. I lay down and stared at the ceiling and told myself I was an idiot who got spooked. And under that loud, practical voice, there was a softer one that said I had stepped into a habit older than me. The habit of following a small light. The next week, we didn't go back. I told Danny I had a cold. She told me she was slammed at work. Malik said he had to help his cousin with a timing belt and didn't meet my eyes while he said it. Greer called once and left a message that was just our names and the word forms like a sigh. We made excuses we didn't believe. That Friday I felt like I'd left the stove on and couldn't check it. I walked by Westminster at noon like a coward, checking the playground in daylight to make sure it's still there. It was. Tourists were flocking the front. A guide in a polo shirt turned toward the hall and gestured. And if you saw him from a distance, you could think he was guiding a fishing line of light into the place. But up close, he was just a man pointing. I breathed easier. Then I glanced up at one of the windows and saw a shape that looked like a man in an old coat hold up a lantern and tilt it as if to say now. I blinked and it was my reflection in the glass. Sometimes you can explain a thing out of your house, but it will sit on the porch anyway and wait. 2 weeks went by. We stopped hearing from Greer. I told myself he'd retired or gotten fed up with flaky volunteers. One night, the fire alarm in our building tripped on somebody's burnt toast. We went into the hall with everyone else and stood under the green exit sign, and the batteries were out in the emergency lights. So it was that weird thin light where everything seems far away. I could smell kerosene and told myself I was making it up because my brain wanted to fill the dark with something it knew. When we got back inside the apartment, I checked my phone and the compass app spun in a slow, smooth circle, like a small child turning on a heel. I told myself to be normal. I went to work, came home, watched bad TV, cooked rice, brushed my teeth, opened a book, closed it, stared at my phone, put it down, picked it up, learned nothing. One Saturday, Danny said, "We should return that key," in the tone you use to break a spell. We put on our jackets and walked to Westminster. The office door was open and a younger guy sat behind the counter, a tablet propped in front of him, a half-finished sandwich next to his elbow. He wore a lanyard with his name on it. I asked for Greer and he shook his head. "He left," the guy said, "a while back." He bit the sandwich and added around the bread. He didn't like the nights. "We have the volunteer key," Danny said, holding it like a holy object we could hand off and be done with. He took it. He set it on the counter with a clink that sounded final. "We're locking earlier now," he said. "Got too many people trying to get in after hours. You heard about that guy who went missing? They found him over by Pratt Street. Police think he got disoriented and climbed something he shouldn't have." He shrugged. It was to him a city story, one of 100 bad turns a person could take. We walked out and didn't say much for a block. On the corner, we ran into a ghost tour in broad daylight. The guide smiled too big and said in a soft voice, "Some people say if you follow the lantern man, he'll lead you out." He let it hang, then said, grinning, "Out of where? That's the fun of it." The tourist laughed. It wasn't a misquote. It was just someone making a scary story safe. I felt something in my jaw grind and made myself unclench it. I avoid Fayette when I can now. There are other ways to go where I need to go, but sometimes you turn a corner and you can't help what the angle shows you. Sometimes I see the cemetery fence from the side, a knife line of black iron against brick, and I don't look long because I've started to notice a trick my eyes play. They take the normal lights of the city, porch lights, kitchen windows, somebody's phone behind a curtain, and make one of them into something rounder, warmer, steadier. It's not a fear if it stays in your eyes. It's just a thing they do. Last week, the power flickered in our building. The hallway went dark, and for a second, the green exit sign was the only thing shown. The air got cold as if something had opened. I smelled oil. I told myself every old building smells like something burned 40 years ago. The power came back. Danny called from the kitchen that the microwave clock had reset. I went out into the hallway alone and stood by the stairwell door and listened. Far away, somebody dropped something heavy. Farther away, a siren went by. Under it, like water under water, I heard a small sound I recognized now, a careful step on grass. 2 nights ago, I woke up around 3 and my phone said my steps count was 2,000 higher than it should have been. I don't have a sleepwalking problem. I locked our door. It was still locked. There was a faint smear of green on the tips of my shoes that looked like moss. I couldn't explain it without reaching for the drawer where I keep words I don't want to use. I'm not telling you this because I think I can convince you. I'm telling you because you live in a city and you will run into old things, and some of them smile and let you pass, and some of them are polite and persistent, like a man with a lantern who has all night. The trick isn't about making you trip. It's about keeping you on your feet just long enough to forget where you were going. It's about the tone someone uses when they say your name like they always did, as if the years between don't count in the dark. If you walk near Westminster after it's closed and you smell kerosene on a wind that should smell like bus brakes and pizza and rain, turn your head. If you feel the pull to go see, undress it of its charm. The light you're thinking you see is not for you. It's for the path itself. You follow it, it won't take you to the gate. It will take you to the part of the cemetery that still knows the old routes. The ones that go away from streets we paved on top of them. The ones that like to double back. I haven't gone back in. I stand on the sidewalk like a man waiting for the bus and look everywhere, but at my own reflection in the windows. Sometimes out of the corner of my eye I catch that round, steady glow in the angle of a shoulder, as if someone is making room for me to join. I don't look. I count the stones on the wall across the street. I say the names of the avenues wrong on purpose in my head, to make a noise a lantern wouldn't recognize. I stand there long enough for the urge to get smaller. Then I walk home by another route and think like a child telling himself a rule that doors lock for a reason. It's late. The apartment is quiet. I can hear the wet tick of tires in the street and the far-off halting moan of a train that has to stop, wait, and go. When I close my eyes, I can map the whole walk between our place and the burial ground without naming a single street. The map is bright with points of light, little round suns hung on corners. I'm learning to leave the bright points alone and find the dark between them. I'm writing this down because if I turn out the lamp, I can smell oil where there shouldn't be any. And because when I walk to the bathroom at night, the light in the hallway sometimes doesn't wait for me. It moves away, patient as habit, deeper into the place I already know. I'm not the kind of person who scares easy. I've spent the last 2 years doing location sound for student films and weird little documentaries. I've slept in a car to record trains at 3 a.m. under a viaduct where rats ran across my shoes. I've hiked into burned woods to capture the crackle of dead branches. If anything, I'm too confident. I tell myself a microphone is a kind of shield. If I can hear it and measure it, it can't really get at me. This happened last fall near Lawrence, Kansas. If you're from around there, you've already guessed the place by the title, Stull Cemetery. I didn't go because of the legends. I went because my friend Jules pitched it as the perfect spot for my field recording project. You wanted natural reverb in a ruined space, she said. Old stone church, open roof. No traffic out there. Moonless night for the quiet. We'll be quick. She was thinking about acoustics and noise floors. I was thinking about an A on my final. There were 3 of us, me, Jules, and our friend Marcus. I knew them both from the journalism school. Jules had a good eye for shot composition and did a lot of ghost hunting content on the side. Not screaming in basements, more like local history tours with a creepier tone and nice drone shots. Marcus was the opposite, skeptical to the point of annoying. If we were out late and a branch snapped, he'd yell, "It's a deer!" Like we were 5 years old. He grew up in Topeka and rolled his eyes at the Stull stories. Every town's got one, he said. Devil Church, Cursed Tree, same copy-paste stories. We set out after 8. Lawrence had that early fall chill where you can smell the leaves before they commit to dropping. The moon was a fingernail somewhere behind thick clouds. We stopped at a tavern off Clinton Parkway because Jules wanted footage of locals for B-roll, and because it felt like the kind of thing people in stories do. They ask around first and get told not to go. Nobody told us anything dramatic. The bartender, a woman with a sleeve of sunflowers, said we should keep out because it was private property and people get citations, not because it was haunted. An older guy nursing a beer said, "Sometimes people sing at night out there," and then added, "Kids, mostly." He didn't look up from the glass. We promised ourselves we'd stay by the fence, roll some ambient, and leave. I packed a Zoom recorder, 2 mics, a power bank, and a pair of closed-back headphones that make your head feel clamped. I also packed something I almost never use, an old omnidirectional boundary mic I bought on eBay that's good for capturing room tone in odd spaces. It's flat as Kansas, no character, just what's there. We turned off the highway onto smaller roads. The fields grew wide and slick with dew. Bales sat like sleeping animals. From far off, you could see a sprinkle of lights that didn't belong to anything big. That's how rural Kansas at night feels to me. Small lights on big dark. There's a chain-link fence around the cemetery with signs that don't mince words. We parked well down the road and walked up in the ditch, staying low. Not because we thought someone was watching, but because we were those kinds of kids. Rule-breaking, but polite. It was colder in the ditch. I could see the vapor of my breath. I don't know how much you know about the old church. I'd seen pictures where it was just a roofless rectangle of stone, a skeleton. What's there now is body language more than body. The hint of corners, a foundation line that's hard to read in the dark. You know you're near it because the ground sinks in a way that feels human-made and because the air changes. That sounds stupid, I don't have better words. It was like walking into a closet after a sunny field. The smell went from hay and gravel to something more mineral. Cold air with stone in it. I clipped the boundary mic to the base of the fence and ran the cable to the recorder. The recorder's meters would give me facts. I always feel better once those little green bars start bouncing. They were dead flat at first. Just the low noise of the preamp itself and a whisper of wind. Cricket sawed out in the weeds. Far off, a dog barked. It was almost boring. Jules touched my arm. "Do you hear that?"
Hear what?
I lifted one ear cup. She frowned toward the dark rectangle. "Singing. Like church," Marcus snorted. "There's a Methodist place back in the town. Sound carries." "It's Tuesday," Jules said. I turned up the gain. On the meters there was something. Not spikes, more like a slow wave rising. It didn't match the wind. I put the headphones back on. At first it was nothing. Then the way you can stare at stars and suddenly see a cluster you'd missed, there it was. Something like a hymn. So far under you almost have to force your ears to be gentle to hear it. A hum that wasn't a hum. I can't explain that well either. It had texture the way breath has texture when it's shaped by mouths instead of machines. I don't want to be dramatic, but it scared me. Not because it was ghosts, because it was too organized to be a trick of air. It had a pulse, a shape, not random. "Play it out," Jules whispered. I turned the headphones toward them. They leaned in, shared a cup like kids sharing secrets. Marcus's face did a thing it doesn't like to do in public. He went still. "It's kids," he said after a beat, but softer now. "Stupid kids. They hide inside there and sing when people come, and when you step in, they stop." He said it like he was inventing a rule to make the world settle back into its corners. "That's the story," Jules said. "They stop when you step inside." "Okay," I said, "because this is where you stop being someone who reads about places and become someone who is actually at a place. We test it. We don't go in, just we test." I pulled the boundary mic free and slung the cable over my shoulder by habit. We followed the faint path to the old stone line. Standing on one side, the sound was faint, but there. I put one foot over and then the other, into what I thought was the footprint of the church. The second my heel touched dirt inside that rectangle, the choir, or whatever it was, went away. It didn't fade. It didn't get quieter with distance. It was there, and then it was erased. I stood there with my breath loud in my own head, the kind of loud where you suddenly hear how your throat clicks when you swallow. I stepped back out. It came back, same pulse, same shape, as if nothing had happened while I was inside, just a skip like a scratched CD. We did it 3-4 times each, like idiots doing a dance routine. Out, in nothing. Out, We tried angles. We put a foot in and left a foot out like a joke, and it did nothing until the inside foot committed. "The line matters," I wrote in my phone notes. "The line cares." Marcus moved around the rectangle and cupped his hands to his mouth. "Hey," he yelled, like maybe real kids would start giggling. The song didn't react. It wasn't the kind of prank where sound feels like it comes from one spot and you can chase it. It was everywhere outside, nowhere inside. We weren't inside the fence and we weren't exactly safe from a ticket, and we knew it. We were about to back off when headlights flicked on the road. We froze in that prey way, immediately stupid. The car slowed, didn't pull in, just crept by. It wasn't a cruiser. The driver didn't roll down a window. For half a second the inside of the car glowed and I saw a dark head and the spill of a dashboard screen. Then it was gone. The choir didn't care. 5 more minutes, Jules said. Then we bail. She had the look she gets when she's lining up a shot, somewhere between a prayer and a dare. Let me get a sweep. The sweep is an audio thing. You play a sine tone that goes from low to high, or a clap, and the way the space responds gives you its shape. I set my phone to play a 10-second sweep and held it low so it wouldn't broadcast far. We tried it from outside the rectangle. The sweep sounded regular and ugly, the way it always does. The recorder caught the space. We tried it from inside. As soon as my shoe crossed the line, the sweep became the only thing I could hear. Not just louder soul. The rest of the world unhooked. It was like dropping into a pool and hearing only the sound that's already in your head. The tone finished and I took a reflex step backwards out of the rectangle, as if I'd been holding my breath. The hum that isn't a hum returned so fast it might not have left. We didn't say much. You don't when something breaks your picture that cleanly. Marcus shook his head like he wanted to fling water out of his ears. Jules' hand shook just a little when she tucked hair behind an ear. Okay, Marcus said finally. Fine, it's an acoustic thing, geometry, trees funnel it. Wind shear, whatever. You're not supposed to go in anyway, and we didn't. Let's go. 2 more, Jules said. She was already backing toward the opposite corner of the rectangle. You stand inside, I stand outside. If it's geometry, we'll hear different things. That's a useful clip for the edit. I went in because of the old habit that says be useful. Whatever we do next, get it on the recorder. I stepped over that line and the world clicked to a dead channel. I could see Jules out there. Her lips moved. She had her hand up like a conductor finding the beat. I couldn't hear a drop of what she was doing. Even my breath felt like it had been recorded earlier and played back wrong. I swallowed. My ears popped. Somewhere behind me in the field, the dog barked again. I didn't hear that either. I didn't hear anything. And I know that sounds like nothing. But if you've ever been in a soundproof booth, you know hearing nothing isn't quiet. It's pressure. It's a push. It makes you aware that sound is a thing you live inside, and when you remove it, your brain flails to find a surface. Jules waved me back. I stepped out and the hum came roaring back like a crowd in a stadium after a timeout, except it never changed volume. It's more that my head's automatic leveling had been fooled and now it was catching up. My knees felt loose. From the road, another set of headlights drifted past slow. Maybe the same car looping. I felt that prey freeze again. The hum didn't even tremble. We were done. We said it without saying it. Let's go before we get in trouble and before I have to admit this is scaring me. I started coiling the boundary cable. That's when Jules said, wait, one more. Marcus, stand at that corner. I'll stand here. You go in and wait. Just 10 seconds. Marcus rolled his eyes, but he went where she pointed. Jules stood 10 feet off the line with her hands on her hips like a stubborn kid. I stepped back inside the rectangle and let the world go dumb. Before, when I'd been inside, I'd been moving. I'd been talking and watching their faces. Now I tested stillness. 10 seconds, I told myself, count 1, 2, 3. The numbers didn't sound like anything in my head. They didn't even feel like numbers. They were shapes moving past an open window. Around 4 or 5, something began that I can only call a tempo. Not an external beat. A shaping. My breath fell into it. My heart had already done so. There's a thing that happens when a choir finds each other in the room. We called it the lock in high school chorus. Everyone hits the chord cleanly, and for a second you're not singing. The room is singing through you. This was that, but inside out. I wasn't making a sound. I could swear to you with anything you name that my mouth was closed and my throat was still. But a shape settled into me and it wanted my chest to move like singing. Not my voice, my body. Somewhere out there where Jules was, the hum must have shifted. She later told me it blossomed from background to melody, soft but complicated, with harmonies like people who'd sung together for a long time. Marcus said it was like an organ in a house you didn't know had one. For me, inside, the pressure deepened. It wasn't pain. It wasn't anything you could point to. It was like being included without being asked. I didn't last 10 seconds. Jules says I didn't last 5. I broke and stepped out as if a hand had let go of the back of my neck. The hum was everywhere again. I slapped a hand to my chest like a hammy actor. My heart was going fast because that's what hearts do when something unnameable touches them. Jules grabbed my wrist. Your mouth, she said, breathless. What about my mouth? You were... She did a motion I can't describe in words, her own lips shaping soundless vowel. Open a little. Like on an ah. I shook my head. I would have told her I'd bet my life I wasn't. But the thing about people you love is, when they look at you and say you were, you believe them enough to not say something stupid about your life. Marcus exhaled long and loud. We're done, he said. We saw the trick. It messes with your ears, it freaks you out. And then you imagine your own mouth is open because your head wants reason. That's the trick. He took a step and then stopped, frowning down. The dew in the grass around his boots looked like it had been brushed one way. All of it not by wind, but by something moving through. Another car crept by. I saw the glow of a phone on the driver's lap. I was suddenly certain we'd be on a Snapchat story by morning. 3 dumb kids and their ghost microphone. Fine. Let us be dumb. Let us be on a screen. Let us be anywhere but here. We packed fast. I didn't even bother with the nice coil photographers make to keep cables happy. We power walked back down the ditch, crouching like that helped. When we got to the car, Jules looked over her shoulder at the fence and then at me. Do you still hear it? She asked. I did. That's the truth. As the car doors shut and the highway noise took over, it lingered like a song stuck in your head. except the part where the song usually fades as you think about something else. This didn't. The pressure in my chest didn't either. I told myself it was adrenaline. We didn't talk much on the way back. Everyone does that after something shaky. Goes quiet to see if the tremble is from cold or fear. At Jules' apartment, Marcus bailed. He said something about a 9 a.m. chem lab. That left me and Jules in the file. It's a weird intimacy. Listening to a place together after the place is gone. We sat at her tiny table and I plugged the recorder into her laptop and we watched the waveform side by side. I'm going to be precise here, because the file is the only reason I'm posting this and not blaming all of it on the stupid powers of suggestion. On the file, there are 3 clear sections where my shoes crossed the line. A clean cut into a wide band of nothing. That's what silence looks like on a waveform, just a flat river. Except the river wasn't flat. Zoomed way in, it had structure. It was not silence. It was a thick braid of frequencies that looked like human voices holding long notes. It looked like 4 voices, not 3. I boosted the gain on that section and played it back. It wasn't loud, even boosted. I don't think it will ever be loud. It sat like it sat out there, soft but sure. But we both leaned forward at the same second because the chord it sat on was not random. It had a tonic and a third and a fifth and then a low something I don't have a neat name for. Not an octave. A line under the floor. I could hear the breath at the start of the held notes. I could hear the way people who've practiced together know when to add a suspension and when to resolve. And the timbre of the upper voices. I am trying not to make a fool of myself here, but the timbre was ours. Mine and Jules's. I know the way my throat colors an ah. I learned it when I tried to sing in high school and realized I always made the vowel too open. I know the way Jules' voice finds the third because she can't resist harmony. We both sat there hearing ourselves in a place we couldn't hear ourselves while we were in it. The 4th voice is the part I don't like to describe. It was lower than Marcus's speaking voice, and it wasn't him. He refuses to listen to that section now. The first time, he was there at the table with us, and when it came in on the second held chord, he pushed the laptop away so hard it skidded and said, "No," like someone had asked him to do something shameful. "It's a bus on the highway," he said. "It's a passing truck." There were no trucks. We scrubbed back and forth across the timeline to be sure. The low note appears exactly when the other voices enter and holds exactly as long as they do. "Lyrics," Jules said suddenly. "Do you hear lyrics?" I shook my head. Then I did, a little. The way you can hear a word in a foreign language when someone tells you what word to expect. A soft Latinish syllable that could be amen, but not in the way we'd say it. Not the Sunday way, the older way. We isolated the inside sections and bounced them as their own file. Jules named it Silent Choir Take 1 Wev before my brain could stop her fingers. It sits on my hard drive with that name, and sometimes I turn the sound on and stare at it and don't hit play. We all had class the next morning. Sleep didn't go well. I lay there and felt that pressure in my chest ease and then return on a pulse that wasn't mine. I told myself it was anxiety. I'd let us go too close to a place people don't want you near, and I was afraid of a fine. My phone buzzed at 3:12. It was a text from an unknown number with a local area code. There was no message. Just an audio file I couldn't open because it had 0 seconds on it. I blocked the number and then thought maybe it was Marcus or Jules with a new line, and I unblocked it and then lay there feeling stupid. The next day, I lugged my recorder into the audio lab and ran a spectrogram of our file. If you've never seen one, it's like a heat map of sound. You can see where the energy sits. The 3 voices, we're calling them voices for lack of a better word, resolved like people who had rehearsed. The top voice, which I hate to call mine, pulled against the root on a little sigh and then came home. The low voice held without vibrato. The interesting thing is the silence. Outside the chords, there is no noise floor. No wind, no insects, no distant hiss of cars. It's like the chords are printed on a void. I don't remember what assignment we were supposed to present that week. I know I handed the professor a different file, train tracks I'd recorded a month earlier, and got an A- and a comment about good leveling. I know I didn't mention stalling class. I didn't because I didn't want a lecture about trespassing, and also because it felt wrong. The way it feels wrong to bring up a nightmare while the sun's still shiny on your coffee. Marcus started avoiding us for a while after that. He'd say he was busy and then show up in group chats posting about some other plan. When I did get him alone and pushed, he got mad in a way that hid something else. "It's a trick," he said. "There are kids out there with a Bluetooth speaker. They mess with people. They upload the scared videos. They must have grabbed your number from the car while we were up the ditch. It's whatever. Ghost YouTube clout. He talked too much. He kept touching the place under his jaw like his throat hurt. Jules went the other way. She wanted to go back. Not to push deeper, she swore. She wanted daylight. Things look different in daylight, she said. If we see the stone lines and the trees, it'll be less… whatever this is. We went on a Sunday afternoon with a northern wind and a fat sky. It was not less anything. It was a place where the living do what the living do, leaving flowers and faded plastic. Names carved by people who didn't babysit us last night, who had their own lives and didn't owe us a thrill. The fence looked shinier in the day. There were fresh zip ties on the gate. We didn't go in. We stood on the road and tried to match the line of the old church with what we were sure of in our heads. I could not place my feet where I had placed them before. The line had moved, or my mind had. An older woman in a dusty sedan slowed, rolled her window down, and told us to leave the place alone. She wasn't angry. She was tired. It takes a lot to make me feel small, but I did. We got back in the car and drove away. As we turned, I glanced back and saw, this is the part you can throw out if you want. The faintest shimmer where the rectangle would be on a very still pond, like the heat you see over summer asphalt. There was no heat. It was 53 degrees. I thought it would fade. The pressure in my chest did. The lingering hum did. Stupidly, I thought the file would help. If I let it be real in a technical way, it would be less real in the other way. That's not how it went. I stopped opening it. I shoved the project folder into a bigger folder and named it Spring Audio Old so I wouldn't see the word choir when I scrolled. 2 weeks later, I was in the journalism building after midnight exporting a rough cut when the fire doors at the end of the hall called up the building's HVAC like they do. That long white noise sigh. White noise is my friend. It fills the corners. But this wasn't white. It had shape. It had the same nut hum. I stood there with my hand on a soda I didn't want anymore and listened to a space that was inside get emptier. Somebody stepped into the hall from the stairwell at the far end and the shape broke, like a finger flicking water away. I told myself I was tired. I packed my bag, and on the way out I heard someone in the restroom softly clear their throat in an ah that wasn't clearing anything. The last thing I'm going to tell you is the thing I've tried not to test. You know how sometimes you stand in a door frame without thinking? That foot over and then the other. You go into a closet to get a coat and you leave the bedroom light on and the closet is its own little square of dark. I stood in my closet the day after that late night in the lab. I stood with my forehead against coats and my shoe just over the line where the door jamb sits. I told myself it was stupid and then I counted to 10 like I had at the rectangle. On 3, I felt my chest catch the shape. On 4, my throat wanted to be an instrument. On 5, the neighbor's muffled TV went away. I stepped back out and the shape gave me back to my apartment. I closed the closet and sat on the edge of my bed and tried not to breathe too loudly. I didn't tell Marcus that part. I told Jules and she said softly, "Me too," and then laughed in a way that wasn't laughter. "It's not the place," she said. "It's the inside. That's the part I can't get around. It's not a question of where. It's a question of what counts as in. If you go out there on a moonless night, you may hear something like a hymn coming up from the bones of the old church. People will tell you it's wind or kids or your own head making shapes in the dark. They may be right. I hope they are. I hope if you step over the line and the choir stops dead, you will feel nothing but your own goofy fear and a little shame for crossing where you shouldn't. But if you step inside and it goes quiet and you feel the pressure of inclusion without a sound, if your friend outside says later that they heard you singing and you know you didn't, do one favor for yourself. When you get home, don't linger in doorways. Don't stand too long in a shower behind a curtain with the bathroom light off. Don't count to 10 with your mouth slightly open on an easy vowel. Because the song, if it is a song, doesn't care about fences. It cares about inside and outside. It cares about the moment you choose to be within or without, and it stops the second you step inside. Not because it's afraid of you or because you broke its spell, but because in that moment you join it, and what it is stops being something you hear and becomes something you do. I still have the file. I keep telling myself I'll delete it. Then I picture it opening on its own when I'm asleep. The playhead creeping across the thick bands of false silence. My own voice finding the third and holding it. And that fourth voice under the floor of the room coming in right where it always does. Patient as stone. Sometimes when the apartment is quiet and I'm crossing the bathroom threshold in the dark, I hear the tail end of a chord resolve with a soft word I won't type here. It ends like a hand resting on your shoulder from behind after you thought you were alone. I turn on the light and it's gone. On moonless nights, people say you can hear the hymn from the ruins. I used to think the ruin was the church. Now after all this, I think the ruin is something we carry with us. You step inside, it stops. You step back out, it returns. That's the part that scares me, that it's waiting, not at a graveyard, but at the soft line of every door.